I deliberately waited like a minute and a half too long just so we'd be late. Because I don't want to ruin a streak. Everyone likes a streak. Where are my notes? Good morning, everyone. We'll get underway. Welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee meeting. This is our 20th. I'm just going to mute my computer so we don't. Mute button. Mute. Amazing. I would like to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 5.1 to 5.5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on January 24th, 2024, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there, roll call. Can I ask the clerk to see if everyone's here?
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry. Here. Councillor Dudas. Councillor Johnson. Here. Councillor Kavanaugh. Here. Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
And Councillor Truster.
Here.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
And Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Declarations of interest. I know we have one. Does anyone have a declaration of interest this morning besides? Nope. Councillor Johnson?
Oh, okay.
Post-holiday.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you. I, Councillor Lane Johnson, declare a potential deemed indirect pecuniary interest on the following items on the Planning and Housing Committee agenda of January 17th, 2024. Item 1, item 5.5, zoning bylaw amendment 29 Russell Avenue. Number 2, item 5.6, application to alter 29 Russell Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, located in the Russell Avenue Range Road Heritage Conservation District, as my spouse has a financial relationship with the owners of the properties.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Confirmation of minutes. Are the minutes of our meeting number 19, Wednesday, November 29th, 2023, received? Confirmed. And the minutes of the joint FCSC PHC minutes Thursday, November 2nd and Friday, November 3rd, 2023. All right, starting the agenda, we'll just see postponements and deferrals. The motion on the memorandum of understanding with Catassa Group. I know councillors have some questions, so we're going to hold that item. With respect to 1592 10th Line Road, there are delegations. We're going to hold that item. For item 5.2, part of 2666 10th Line Road, there are no delegations. There's no presentation. Our members of the, if to the applicant team, if the committee is prepared to carry this today, do you still wish to speak?
Yes, we would gladly accept the rezoning if it's passed as a consent item.
Do members of the committee want to hold this item?
Can I just make a very quick comment, Chair?
Sure.
Just wanted to say for any members of the community that may be listening, I recognize that there are outstanding transportation concerns, and I am actively working with the applicant and planning staff on those. This is zoning, not site plan, but just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. Is this item carried? Thank you very much. The zoning bylaw amendment for 225 Cope Drive and 166 Shellwright Street. We don't have any public delegations on this item. Do members of the committee wish to have this one held? Yep, so we've had a request to hold that one. That will be held for discussion. The zoning bylaw amendment for 3750 North Bowesville Road. There are a number of public delegations on this one, I believe, so we're going to hold this item for discussion. The zoning bylaw amendment at 29 Russell Avenue, there's 5.5, which is the zoning bylaw amendment, and 5.6, which is the heritage permit on that one. There are no public delegations. I know we've received some correspondence from members of the public, and I believe there is a technical motion associated with the heritage permit. I should have just taken like another 3 weeks off, eh? Council, Vice Chair Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Whereas report recommendation 1 erroneously states that the plans prepared by Woodman Architect and Associates is dated as 26 July 2023 in both the English and French report recommendations. And whereas the plans referenced as supporting document 6 elevations were dated 28 July 2023. Therefore, be it resolved that report recommendation 1 in both English and French be amended to state plans prepared by Woodman Architect and Associates is dated as 28 July 2023, 28 juillet 2023.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. To the members of the applicant team, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you still wish to speak? Thank you. Do members of the committee want to hold this one? Nope. Is the technical amendment carried? Is the zoning bylaw amendment carried? Is the heritage application carried? Thank you very much. There is a joint presentation on items 5.7 and 5.8, as well as a technical motion. So we're going to hold that one on the land surveys. In camera. There is a motion I think we can deal with fairly quickly that has been previously given. Vice Chair Gower had moved a motion with respect to the lands at 1835 Stittsville, Maine. I believe he'd like to bring forward a motion to defer that, Vice Chair.
Yes, be it resolved that this motion be deferred to the January 31st, 2024 Planning and Housing Committee meeting. Both of the parties who are involved in this have asked for a couple more weeks and an opportunity to meet with staff, and staff have agreed. And I want to thank the applicants, if they're watching, for agreeing to try to come to a collaborative solution here.
That is good news. Is that item carried?
Carried.
Thank you, members. Oh, and then there is also we've got a waiver of the rules of procedure to deal with 185 Montreal Road. So can I add that to the agenda? Waiver of demolition control. Thank you. Do you mind if I ask for the motion now? Go ahead, please, Vice Chair.
Whereas the building on the parcel of land known as 185 Montreal Road is vacant and there have been a string of recent break-ins and drug use on the property. And whereas given the poor condition of the building and the risks to public safety, it would be in the public interest to demolish the building. And whereas there is currently no building permit application for a replacement building, therefore be it resolved that council approve demolition control for the existing buildings on the property, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the property owner pay PRED $5,339.42, includes $1,028 in legal fees plus HST, which is the fee associated with the demolition control application. That until the time of the construction of the first replacement building, the registered owner shall landscape the property to the satisfaction of the general manager of planning, real estate, and economic development. The registered owner shall prohibit the use of the property for other interim uses and maintain the property in accordance with the property standards bylaw. 3, the landscaping shall include permanent transparent fencing prohibiting access to the property, as well as soft landscaping along the entire frontage to a depth of 4 meters, which may include grass and low shrubs. The remainder of the property may be granular or wildflower seed mix. 4, the owner shall pay 50% securities to the city for the value of landscaping the property, with the securities to be released once these works are completed. 5, the registered owner shall enter into an agreement with the city of Ottawa to include the foregoing conditions and pay all costs associated with the registration of said agreement. At such time as a building permit is issued to redevelop the site and the replacement building is in place, the agreement will become null and void and will be released upon request of the owner. The owner shall pay all costs associated with the release of the agreement. 6, the registered owner agrees that a demolition permit will not be issued and the buildings cannot be demolished until such time that the agreement referenced herein has been executed and registered on title. 7, this approval is considered null and void if the agreement is not executed within 6 months of council's approval.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that item carried? Thank you. Going back to the start of the agenda, this meeting got a whole lot interesting. Oh, they're back. Good. It got a whole lot less interesting, but glad we're going to have some more commentary. All right, back to the front of the agenda. The first item with which we'll deal, postponements and deferrals, the motion with respect to a memorandum of understanding with Catassa Group. I know members of the committee had questions and comments, so the speakers list is open. I note that Councillor Menard is here. Councillor Curry?
I want to actually just ask a question about the memo that we got, I believe, basically from David White and Karen Shepherd. Is that possible?
It is. The memo itself is not up to be received. So it's certainly going to inform councillors' votes. I know the industry, if the memo was going to be an item for discussion, the industry has thoughts on the process. I'm not going to entertain any motions with respect to process today. So, you know, I think you can ask questions about the applicability of that memo to this application. But I know other councillors have direction or questions of staff that will probably lead to further process on the voluntary benefits.
Okay, I just wanted a really first quick question, then maybe I'll let other people ask what their questions. But in the memo, it indicates that the Integrity Commissioner said this is really a policy issue. And then further on, it says if any councillors have any concerns, they should go to the Integrity Commissioner. But so I was just slightly confused, but maybe it's just because of the actual issue. So because it's a policy issue, the Integrity Commissioner is saying she won't deal with it, the policy parts of it, because there's a policy that can deal with that. But if there are concerns that by a councillor, that another councillor or anybody, I guess it says anyone has concerns about a councillor's conduct, that there was influence or manipulation or whatever it was, then they could go to the Integrity Commissioner, because then that's a code of conduct thing. So it's only for code of conduct that the Integrity Commissioner is involved. Otherwise, we have a policy. That's clear?
Is that a fair way of putting it, Mr. Mark?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that is my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, I don't know if these are in the correct order. I'm just going to get my screen. Councillor Kitts.
I do think Councillor Carr was ahead of me, but it's, I go ahead. Okay. So I moved deferral on this item the last time it was before us, because in 2021, due to a supply chain issue, a planned developer built speed bump was going to be delayed a year in one of my subdivisions. And because of that, I asked if the developer would be willing to purchase 2 speed boards for the area, given the delay. At that time, transportation staff and the city clerk advised that I should run this by the Integrity Commissioner. And the decision rendered was that to accept these 2 speed boards, valued at approximately $6,000, it would be a contravention of the code of conduct. So the speed boards were never installed. And now we're being told that a negotiated $300,000 voluntary payment, partially directed at traffic calming, which I could assume could be something like purchasing speed boards, is okay. So I appreciate that the Integrity Commissioner has looked at both situations. I feel like there's some inconsistency here on the advice being applied, and that concerns me. So, I'm not going to be voting against the motion, but I am concerned about the precedent we're setting here and about, again, how different situations are being handled very differently and different advice is being given. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. And I'll listen to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Carr? Yeah, so at this committee, we all get to participate.
Sorry, thanks. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. I have a question about process, and I'm hoping that I can ask staff. I don't have any comments specifically about the MOU with CATAS. I don't think that should be held up. I mean, obviously, the developer wants that to the development to go ahead. I'm just wondering if this would be something that would be considered to be sort of a form of a community benefit agreement. That's my first question to staff.
Mr. Chair, there has been and will continue to be an effort to ensure that this does not come within Section 37 of the Planning Act with respect to community benefits agreements. That is the effort that will be made.
So you're saying that it would not be this sort of arrangement would not be a community benefit agreement?
So just to remind members of committee, a community benefit, the reason I feel the need to remind it is community benefits were used with respect to other contributions or things that have been done by developers in the past. Hazelview / Heron Park, Manor Park come to mind. Community benefits is now a term under what is Section 37 of the Planning Act. The old 37 provided for payments to the city or other benefits in return for height and density. That has been replaced by a new Section 37, which deals with the community benefit charge, which was imposed by council of 4% on certain types of development in the third quarter of 2022. And legal is making efforts to ensure that what is taking place, if this motion is approved, will not be considered an in-kind contribution for the purposes of Section 37 of the Municipal Act. So we are trying to do our best to avoid the developer getting a credit for an in-kind contribution under Section 37.
Okay, thank you very much. Because when you speak about Hazelview and for Heron Gate, I was community association president at the time. Councillor Cloutier, previous Councillor Cloutier was the councillor, and we had quite a lot of discussion about that, what was called a social contract, but essentially it was a community benefits agreement. And then it was more or less replicated for Manor Park. So those sort of agreements are no longer allowed because of the changes from Section 37 to the community benefits charges, correct? That's what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying, because in fact, with the recent approval of the settlement with 1047 Richmond Road, again, in that case, the developer, in reaching the settlement with the city, agreed to provide, as I recall, I can't recall if it was 15 or 30. I think it's 15 per building. So 30 units of affordable housing in that development. So we have the city of Ottawa has sought to do that post the enactment of the community benefit charge bylaw, and the developer again voluntarily agreed to that term.
Okay, so they're still allowed. You just make attempts to make sure that they're not interfering with the provincial policy.
To the best of our ability, yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then I guess my next question is, when we received the analysis of motions for Lansdowne, and there was
Councillor Carr,
yeah.
The item that we're dealing with is whether or not to approve the voluntary benefit from for CATASA. Is that a path that you're going down?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the conditions that exist for when we undertake, what is the difference between a community benefit agreement and a voluntary contribution? How are those defined? And what is the policy framework? Because if we can still, I'm just trying to understand the difference. What exists? Is it a community benefit? Is it a voluntary contribution? And what are the rules for voluntary contributions? So it's not with respect to CATASA, but I think it's important for us to understand what is in place to define that as counselors. If we're working with developers, I mean, we want to make sure we're not taking developer contributions, but at the same time, having benefits for our community. And I've noticed as well, Toronto has a policy for voluntary donations. We don't have that here. And so I think it's useful to understand, and certainly as a counselor for the area that had that first social contract agreement, it's something that I get questions about all the time.
So I just want to make sure some of the big stakeholders in this discussion, the Federation of Citizens Associations, the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, I just want to make sure that, this discussion of the policy framework for voluntary benefits was not advertised as part of the agenda. So I just want to make sure that we are focused on the application that's before us. When I would certainly welcome any kind of direction to staff to pursue this further, working with our stakeholders and with city councillors.
Okay, so given that there's not a straight answer between the voluntary contributions, the community benefits and how it works, then I guess Councillor Troster, I talked to Councillor Kitts about this. I thought she was going to put something forward, but I'll leave the direction to a committee member to put forward some sort of direction, because I do think we need some clarity on when this is, just to avoid any developer influence from our point of view, as well as to make sure that we're having a consistent approach to every councillor, every development, with consultation with the development industry.
Absolutely. And it sounds like that direction is coming. I do have Councillor Brockington next.
Thanks, Chair. I, first of all, will be supporting the motion that's before us. Now, I'd just like to add, based on the conversation so far, that there's no greater advocate for a community, particularly when there's a development file present, than the city councillor. And the city councillor's job is to summarize the needs that exist in the community, what they've heard from their residents, and try, by working with staff and the developer, to get as much, we'll call it, community benefits as possible. So I applaud colleagues who have come into agreements like what we have before us, because the needs are infinite, our own budgets are finite, and if we can achieve investments like what we have before us, that's a win. So if people are unsure whether or not they may be crossing the line about, questionable influence on the outcome of a vote, then the advice is go see the integrity commissioner. That's always your best bet if you're unsure of whether certain activities are permitted or not. But I can think of many examples where I thought city staff, as part of a site plan process, were asking for too much, but I kept quiet because I want to get as much I can for my community. And there are times when I'm asking for a lot more in a site plan that staff don't support and the developer don't support, and I don't understand why I'm the only one advocating. So when I see colleagues bring agreements like this forward, I'm very supportive, because we know that with many different developments, the community raises these concerns and we have a limited amount of resources to address it. So that's my 2 cents on this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. So yes, this is also of great interest to me, because in my ward, we had a developer that was interested in paying for some active transportation near where there will be a really large development. And we were told that we were constrained by bills 23 and 109, and this is not something that we could do. So this is a suggested direction to staff, and staff can let me know if it's friendly, to ask staff to put a memo together outlining their interpretation of when councillors might be able to work with developers to provide additional community benefits. If you don't want to use the word community benefits, we could say, pardon? You do
Mr.
not.
Chair, it would be better like staff, of course, will take whatever direction committee gives, but if those two words weren't used, it
All
would
right.
be an
Okay,
improvement.
so let's say a direction to staff. Sorry, my staff was just putting this together in real time. So a direction to staff outlining the potential outlining potential guidelines for counselors to negotiate additional financial contributions with special attention to the new legislation context of Bills 23 and 109. So I could wordsmith that afterwards, but essentially I think what we're all asking here for is an interpretation of what we can do when and what from a policy perspective is permissible. Because I actually do think in many cases, there are developers who are happy to contribute more and they don't know what they're allowed to do either. So, and then my only question, and maybe Councillor Menard can answer this, is was this done under the old, was this initially negotiated pre-Bill 23? So is this when the councillor had the possibility of pulling site plan? Or is this under the new regime?
No, so it's not related to a specific application. It is, we have several applications from this group within the ward, some before Bill 23, some after Bill 23. There was a recognition that community was asking for these types of voluntary contributions. And when discussing it, we made it clear these would be voluntary, but that the community is certainly hoping for these types of contributions. So.
Okay, let's call it voluntary contributions instead of community benefits. So if that is taken as friendly direction from staff, I think we would all appreciate that policy clarity.
Will staff take that as direction?
I believe the city solicitor would accept that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney?
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll keep it brief. I think that's what it's all about. It's about the clarity. I think there's a lot of committees like this committee where Jeff gets to read a wonderful preamble about how many days of this and that, and we know the rules inside and out. With roads, MTO rules apply. As councillors, we can't get a stop sign put in without following certain criteria. Clear as day. This one here, it seems to be a little bit of a hodgepodge between municipalities and how they determine or look at the policy itself. So as part of what Councillor Troster is doing, I really support. I think looking at best practices of similar size municipalities, Mississauga, even the Torontos, even down to Hamilton, to see how they deal with it, I think would be a good opportunity and bring that back to this table so we can make it very clear in the future. No one wants to get into trouble as a councillor and no one wants to get in trouble as an IC. So let's set ourselves up for success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well said. Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Chair. No, I appreciate this is something new. So we need to check the rules and we probably would all like to have these kinds of things, these voluntary contributions. So if we know that that's the rules of the game, I mean, because there's no such thing as one incident, it's going to happen over and over again. If that is accepted, then it will be used as an example. And we want to just make it clear, and I appreciate that staff have laid out that this is fine to do. So we have a start on that. I imagine that others would like to do the same. I can see the future holding that, and we're moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. So staff are going to go away and help kick us off on a discussion of what are the parameters around these sort of voluntary contributions. More discussion to come, and that's great. The motion that's before us is to authorize the City of Ottawa to enter into an MOU with Catassa Group for the purposes of realizing the voluntary contributions. Is that carried? Thank you very much, colleagues. The zoning bylaw amendment for 1592 10th Line Road. There is a public delegation. There are applicants who are prepared to make a presentation, and I believe our city planning staff will kick us off with their presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. We're in your hands.
Members of the committee. For those who don't know me, my name is Michael Boughton. I'm planner with the Development Review East team. I will outline the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, the supporting development proposal, and planning staff's position, and conclude with a recommendation to approve the amendment. The subject property is 1592 10th Line Road within the Queenswood Heights community of Orleans. The property is located 350 meters north along 10th Line Road from the intersection of Charlemagne Boulevard and Des Epinette Avenue. The site is approximately 1,500 square meters in area. It has frontage on 10th Line Road and the local street Phoenix Crescent. It's approximately 32 meters of frontage on both streets with a depth of 46 meters. Next slide. The site is currently occupied by a two-story single dwelling containing 5 rental units. The driveway access is formally from 10th Line Road. However, it does extend informally all the way through to Phoenix Crescent. To the east of this particular site, across 10th Line Road, is the Rafe Reel Recreation Complex, and right adjacent to it is the Fallingbrook Shopping Center. To the south, west, and north of the site is the residential community of Queenswood Heights. Immediately north of the site is an 18-meter wide city-owned pathway block that has a pathway linking 10th Line Road to Phoenix Crescent and the local streets within proximity of the site. That's Vince Drive, Granada Drive, and Leanne Street. Next slide. The proposed amendment consists of 2 3-story apartment buildings, each fronting on one building fronting on each of the public streets. There's an interior courtyard provided between the 2 buildings with an outdoor communal amenity area in the north side yard. There's a total of 27 one-bedroom units in 15 units contained within the building fronting on Phoenix Crescent and 12 units in the building fronting along 10th Line Road. Both apartment buildings are, next slide, I suppose. Both apartment buildings are modular in design, shown on the screen, with each module, except for one, consisting of 6 dwelling units, accessible by front and rear common enclosed staircases. All vehicle parking is underground, accessible only from 10th Line Road. There's 32 parking spots in total, 27 dedicated to the dwelling units and 5 reserved for visitors parking. And there's also a proposed enclosed interior waste storage room at the ground level in the building facing Phoenix Crescent. Next slide. The planning staff evaluated the proposal against the relevant official plan policies. This particular site is designated minor corridor on Schedule B8 of the official plan, which is the Suburban East Transect. In reviewing the application, the policy review staff conclude that the subject site is adequately suited for the proposed use with respect to physical characteristics, adequacy of existing municipal services and road network. The proposed amendment and zoning amendment, the proposed development and zoning amendment introduce a compatible and alternative form of low-rise housing into the surrounding residential neighborhood. The proposal is supported by local transit and is adjacent to services and amenities, as I mentioned. It supports the evolution of the area towards 15-minute neighborhoods, and it supports intensification along corridors where most services and amenities are located. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide. Next. Yeah. So I'll go on to the current zoning. The current zoning for the site is residential third density, subzone Z. It's R3Z, subject to current exception 1186. That zone allows a mix of residential building forms ranging from single detached to townhouse dwellings. The proposed amendment is to change the zoning to residential fourth density, subzone Z, subject to amendment, to permit the low-rise apartment use. The three proposed site-specific exceptions are to reduce the applicable minimum required parking rate from 1.2 to 1.1 spaces per dwelling unit, a change that would result in an actual reduction of 2 spaces from the standard minimum requirement. Secondly, to reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 3 meters to 2.35 meters, which would apply to both 10th Line Road and the Phoenix Road frontages, given that this lot is a through lot according to the zoning bylaw. And finally, to prohibit the covered and uncovered balconies from projecting into that reduced minimum front yard that we will establish. In evaluating the zoning amendment, staff find that the form and scale of development provides appropriate building setbacks and separation from the adjacent single detached dwelling directly south of the site. The reduced front yard setback is minimal in comparison to what is permitted in the current R3 zone. And the reduced vehicle parking requirement is minimal. And all spaces are provided, as I mentioned, underground, accessible only from 10th Line Road. Next slide. We can skip past this one. This is just a summary of what I've already said. 32 parking spaces are provided, 27 devoted to the residents, 6 reserved for the visitors parking. The visitors parking standard rate is not changed. The only change is that 2 parking space difference between the 1.1 and the 1.2 parking space. So next slide. And city staff received a considerable amount of public input in response to the zoning bylaw amendment and the supporting site plan control application. Most of the comments expressed considerable concern related to incompatible building mass, built form, density, undesired increased traffic, and on-street parking use on local streets. So in response to those comments, city staff feel the building mass and density have been reduced from that initially proposed, which was 30 units, now reduced down to 27 units. The Phoenix Crescent building has been reduced in mass and scale from 18 to 15 dwelling units. Its separation, as I mentioned, from the adjacent single detached dwelling has been increased. It is now set back farther as well from the road allowance by an additional 1 meter from what was originally proposed. With respect to transportation or impacts on traffic, no transportation impact assessment is required simply because the proposed development does not meet the thresholds established in the city's guidelines to require such a study. And with respect to on-street parking, quite simply, residents can contact bylaw enforcement if they feel that it is being abused on the local streets. And with that, to conclude, for the reasons outlined, the department therefore recommends that the proposed zoning amendment be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I just want to say I very much appreciate the time you took to outline exactly what the zoning changes were that we're seeking from R3Z to R4Z, but the R4Z would have some site-specific exceptions related to the balconies, the parking, and the setback. So I really appreciate setting that out clearly for us. Thank you. So we have one public delegation, Mr. Brownrigg. Sorry. Oh, the applicants. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Connor. We're going to ask you to wait just like 3 more minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes each. So we have, I think, Paul Robinson is prepared to address the committee. Paul, we've had a good presentation as to what this proposal is, but you are invited to speak to us about why you feel the rezoning is justified.
Thank you. I'm the applicant here on behalf of the owners. Much of what Michael presented was going to be in my presentation. The application before you is to rezone the lands from an R3Z to an R4Z to allow a compatible form of development in the area. 27 new units, a 15-unit building and a 12-unit building. It meets the height requirements. Parking is accessible only via 10th line to a right in, right out. So there was not expected to be any spillover parking onto the adjacent streets. We are providing 5 parking spaces for visitor, which we feel is an appropriate number of visitor parking spaces, and it's going to be 1 parking space per unit for these 1-bedroom units. And the residents who move into this will be fully aware that there is only 1 parking space per unit. We feel that this is a excellent form of housing that would appeal to people who are potentially living nearby and are becoming empty nesters and want to move away from their single family home and into something that is smaller but is still in the community. It's across the road from the Ray Friel Center and the library, and there are daily shopping across the road at the Fallingbrook Shopping Center, and there is public transit on 10th line. I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Do members of the committee have any questions of the applicant? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your intervention today. Mr. Brownrigg, if you and your team want to make a presentation, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Just to maximize sentiment.
It's working. It's working, Connor.
Victoria, do you want to sit here? Can I borrow this?
No.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for everybody's patience with my girls today. Firstly, I'll say my name is Connor Brownrigg, and I own the house right next door to this proposed development, which is why I wanted to come here. I'd like to start by saying that Dan Dory, the owner, has been very communicative with me, and I think he's conducted himself in a very respectable way with me. There's been some vilification of him, I think, in the community. A lot of people were very upset by this. And if there is anyone in the community listening, I wanted to say that I think that Dan is a respectable businessman, and that I think he should be treated with a little bit more respect, but from the community. I was very reluctant about this proposal being the next door neighbor because of privacy. That was a big concern for me. So I am grateful that the city has changed the direction of the balconies, I believe is one of the changes. I would ask that if this does happen though, okay, sit with me, that if this does happen, that the developer be responsible for some kind of a natural barrier like hedges or trees or something. That might actually even be in the plans already, I'm not aware. And I do believe it would be fair for the developer to be responsible for those costs. That said, I was also very concerned about the impact that this could have on my property value. And the surrounding neighbors as well. And I'd like to say, this is more for the neighbors. I've done a lot of research about the impact of infill on surrounding neighborhoods, not just in Canada, but in the US, Australia, and Sweden. And it's almost irrefutable that infill, like what's going to happen here, raises the property values of the surrounding neighbors. And so this could actually, in the long run, be helpful to us. In fact, it almost will certainly increase our property values, which I'm happy about. The one exception to that is during the construction period. And I think that is just obvious, no explanation needed. And so what I'm hoping that the city, the developer and the contractor can all make sure of is that the length of construction is kept to a reasonable minimum. I have seen the impact where construction stops sometimes for months at a time if funding is an issue. If there are, delays that happen for various reasons. With this large dig, I do think this is a fairly complex undertaking. So I just ask that the city make sure before the shovels go in the ground that that there is ample funding with plenty of buffer in place to minimize the likelihood of delays and disruption to the neighborhood. And one final point, we get a lot of parking on Phoenix Crescent from visitors, and there isn't a whole lot of parking enforcement right now, which I'm happy about. But after this goes up, I believe it'll be a lot easier for a lot of visitors to just park on Phoenix. Yes, there are the 5 visitor spots, but I feel quite sure that many of them will just park on Phoenix. So I do ask that the city enforce parking rules after this goes in place to keep the street free from too many cars for too long. I think they're at their wits' end, so I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Connor. I just want to see, there are a couple of councilors with their hands up with questions for you.
For me? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Hello,
Hi,
cutest delegation ever. Can I ask what your daughter's names are?
this is Audrey. And what's your name? Victoria.
Hi, Audrey. Hi, Victoria. So I want to thank you for coming today. I'm just here to say I'm really glad you did that research. I live in Centertown where our private homes, individual family homes live side by side with low-rise multiplexes like this. More neighbors is a great thing. It's brought more kids to our street. It's brought more resources to the neighborhood. And we need to build did you say 175,000? 145,000 new homes in the next 10 years to meet provincial targets so that when your little girls grow up, they'll have a place to live in the neighborhood.
Well, they're with me till they're 18. That's it.
Yeah, all right, there we go. They're out. But I also just want to say that coming from the most densely packed ward in Centertown, I represent Somerset Ward, having more neighbors has only brought more joy, more activities to the neighborhood. So that's just something I constantly want to tell our suburban friends. And cars on the street, parked cars, it's actually traffic calming. It's true. People can't speed on your street when there's cars parked on it. So anyway, so thank you very much for coming today. And the only other thing I'll say is it seems that some of the things you're suggesting around fencing, these are things that can be dealt with at the site plan level. So I hope that the developer continues conversations with you and city staff to make sure that the development is harmonious. Yeah, thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't really have much to say in terms of the substance of your delegation, which was fantastic. I just wanted to mention in a time where it's difficult to get public participation in these sorts of discussions, you've shown up today with your 2 daughters, which I can only assume are twins. My apologies if they're not, and delivered pretty much a flawless on-time delegation that was really honest, and I think you've inspired parents and certainly me as a dad, and I just want to thank you very much for coming out and doing this today. This made my day. I doubt I'll see a delegation today that made me quite as happy as this one, so thank you.
Oh, good job.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kelly. Connor, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions for you.
Thank you.
I was going to respond in response to Mr. Robinson's presentation that being an empty nester rocks. He raised empty nesters, but oh my God, they're cute. Okay, back on track. Does anyone want to ask staff about some of those site plan considerations with respect to the privacy fence? Or are we just assuming that that'll get done? Don't see any questions, hands up. So I'll ask, is a privacy consideration something that we can do in site plan?
Mr. Chair, I believe the latest version of the site plan submitted just before the Christmas period does propose a wood board privacy fence along the common lot line of Mr. Brownwick's property. I will have to investigate with Mr. Robinson if there's perhaps more that can be done that is shown on the site plan or landscape plan.
Thank you. And I see Mr. Robinson is still here and nodding his head. So I'm sure there'll be some productive discussions around that. So thank you for raising it, Connor. I don't see any other hands up. Were there any technical motions on this one? I've like totally lost track of what I'm doing. Amazing. Is this item carried? Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Michael. What do we got next? Cope Drive and Cellerite. Am I right? On the street. So with respect to this one, we don't have, I wrote down that we're holding this. Oh, Councillor Kavanaugh, right. So I hadn't intended to have a full presentation on this one. Do members want the presentation? I'm sure staff are prepared to provide that. No. Yeah, Councillor Kavanaugh, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. It would be a question, I guess, to staff just to, but I just wanted to ask if this was a resubmission, because it said in 2021, there was an approval of 206 units, but then it was proposed to 163. So it went down 40 units. And I guess that's what caught my eye. And it was given that we're trying to put in more units, every application we see, I just wanted to know what the rationale was. And we're seeing an increase in single family dwellings up to 91, that was up to 47 in the 2021 amendment. There's a proposal for 36 townhouses, back-to-back townhouse dwellings. In the 2021 proposal, it was 16 semi-detached dwellings and 107 townhouse dwellings and 36 back-to-back townhouse dwellings. And I just felt that it was important to talk about that, given that in most cases, we're trying to push for more housing, and this was a drop in housing by 40 units. So that is my question to staff and
excellent. And I will note that Vincent is here as well from Claridge, who can answer any questions. But first, just Allison and Kieran, you've heard Councillor Kavanaugh's question. Do you want to address the reduction in the number of units sought and now proposed to be recommended for approval?
Morning, Mr. Chair. I can speak to that. Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. The reduction in units proposing from townhouses to singles in this subdivision are still an appropriate dwelling type in the R3Z zone. So singles are still acceptable within the subdivision itself. And the density targets of the official plan are still being met even with the drop in units.
Okay, it just continues to surprise me when we're constantly pushing for more units that we would actually have an application that had more units and drop it by 40 units. It seemed like the rationale was that they were worried about traffic on the local streets, and we're constantly pushing back against that to increase the number of housing units. We've talked about it so many times about how many units we need. I guess I've got a concern about that, and I don't want this to be a precedent. So I just can't accept. Thank you.
Okay, we hear the concern. I don't know if it's appropriate at this point to give Mr. Denham an opportunity to reply to that question as well in terms of why. Vincent, if you do want to take a couple of moments to address that, I'd afford you the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so it's really just reacting to the market we have today. And just to give a bit more context, so we actually purchased the sites south of Cope and north of the Monaghan Drain since those approvals. And we're proposing a lot of density on those sites. So 192 units on the southern site, apartment blocks. And then on the north, we have an application coming in soon for about 200 more units. So it's reacting to the market as well as reacting to competing with ourselves on other sites. So we are adding a lot of units in the area, but this site, we needed to change the housing type.
Thank you. Councillor Curry?
Yeah, just a quick question maybe for Tim Mark. What Councillor Kavanagh is talking about, the idea that we would like to see more density there. Is that something that if we voted against that planning committee would be something the OLT would entertain as a reason and acceptable reason for voting against something?
In the absence of minimum density requirements in a zoning bylaw, it would be an incredibly difficult position to successfully advance at the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Okay, just an interesting question. But when we always talk about what planning rationale do we have here, absolutely we want more density, but would that actually hold up at the OLT because that's what we want? Interesting, and maybe it'd be different from case to case, but in this particular one, it'd be difficult to vote to get an overturn. Anyway, okay, thank you.
At this point, I'm going to dissent from supporting it. Thank you.
Understood, and legitimate. So is this item carried? Carried with a dissent from Councillor Kavanagh. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. Moving on to North Bowesville Road. Okay. Yeah, so we have a presentation on this one. We have the applicants prepared to address it, and there are a number of public delegations as well. So we'll turn first to Tracy and the team to make the staff presentation. Tell us, what is this? What are they recommending we approve?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Tracy. We're in your hands.
Well, thanks. Members of Planning and Housing Committee and the public. This presentation is for the zoning bylaw amendment application for 3750 North Bowesville Road. Oh.
Can I ask just a little closer to the mic? It's
Sure.
a little bit tougher. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The proposal is for two 14-story towers on top of two 6 to 9-story podiums, which are connected by a 1 to 2-story podium in the middle of the site. The zoning bylaw amendment is not required for the 14-story tower height, but it is required to remove the floor space index, to reduce the parking ratio, and to reduce the building setback to the southern property line. The image above is a preliminary architectural drawing as the building would appear from North Bowesville Road. Next slide. The site is located at 3750 North Bowesville Road, as shown by the pink star. The site is currently developed with a 2-story convention center and associated surface parking. It was previously called Tudor Hall, but it's now the Mosaic Convention Center. As you can see from the image, the Ottawa Hunt and Golf Course abuts the site to the south. The 10-story IBM office building abuts the site to the west, and the 3-story parking structure used by IBM staff is to the north. To the east of the site is a low-rise residential community with predominantly 2-story dwellings. Hunt Club Road to the south of the site and south of the golf course, and Riverside Drive to the west are both arterial roads in terms of road design and function, and are also designated as minor corridors and transit priority corridors in the official plan. This is the bird's eye view of the site, shown again by the pink star. One can see Riverside Drive, the IBM building, the surface parking, and the parking structure, the golf course with significant tree plantings, and the low-rise residential community. The site is shown again by the pink star and is in the outer urban transect in a neighborhood designation with no overlays in the city's official plan. You can see that both Hunt Club Road and Riverside Drive are minor corridors as designated by the thinner of the 2 purple lines. Next slide. The preliminary site plan shows the proposal with the setbacks from the property lines, the step-ups of the buildings, vehicular and pedestrian access, amenity space, and some landscaping. The elevations show the preliminary architectural drawings as seen from North Bowesville Road. Next slide. The details of the proposal are to remove the floor space index, which is currently 1.0. It will be dropped down to 0, to reduce the residential parking ratio from 1.2 to 0.7 spaces per dwelling unit, which translates from 473 spaces to 287 spaces for the 392 residential units. A reduction to visitor parking, the ratio would drop from 0.2 to 0.1 spaces per dwelling unit, which would be a drop of from 79 spaces to 40 spaces, again, for the 392 dwelling units. And the request is also to reduce the southern setback for a portion of the building over 7 stories from 10 meters to 3.3 meters. The general policies that are supportive of this application would be sections 2.1, 3.2, 3.3, and in section 4. As I said, they're found throughout the official plan, dealing with intensification, supporting transit, supporting 15-minute neighborhoods, reducing our environmental impact, reducing the supply of parking, and providing housing options for all ages and incomes. Specific supportive policies relate to the outer urban transect and the neighborhood designation, which relate to promoting and enhancing mobility options, providing a diverse housing form, accommodating growth in a more urban form that is gradual, integrated, sustainable, and context sensitive. The planning rationale for this application is the 14 stories is currently permitted as per the current zoning bylaw. The floor space index, or FSI, is an outdated tool that has been replaced by zoning and design guidelines to ensure appropriate development. Reduced parking encourages residents and visitors to take alternate modes of transportation and is supported by policies in the official plan. And the reduced setback on the southern side is only for the top portion of the building, and the chances of A, the golf course developing, and B, developing in close proximity to the property line are slim, given the significance of the golf course, as well as the mature trees that would likely be retained. Our recommendation is for approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I appreciate setting out very clearly what the specific permissions are that the applicant is seeking along with your approval to, or your recommendation to approve those. We'll have a chance to come back to staff to ask questions in a moment. For the time right now, though, Brian Casagrande and the team will have an opportunity to address us for 5 minutes. Who's up? Brian's up. Good morning, Mr. Casagrande. You have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask you first and foremost, I know there's some delegations and my presentation will be very redundant to Tracy's. Is it possible, given the team that we've brought, that we could go up at the end of those in case there's questions that we can respond to?
I'll leave that up to the committee. Did you want to give the applicant team an opportunity to respond, or would you prefer to hear the rationale for approval now? Pardon? Yeah. So ordinarily, we receive rather than responding to what is raised by the public delegations, I would just like to hear your rationale now for why these zoning changes should be approved.
Okay, I can do that. Just for curiosity, Mr. Chair, strategically to ensure I can speak last, should I be registering like at the very last minute so is it based on who registers first?
So I think we can take a look at the archives of this committee and see that general practice is to hear from staff, we hear from the applicant, and then we hear from the public delegations, and then we go for questions of councillors back to staff.
I see. I mean, I'd encourage you to rethink that personally, because I think there's value that we can offer if we speak at the end, but I'll leave that
Give
with you.
the developer the last word. I get it. You have
Anyway.
5 minutes now.
Yeah, certainly. And I have a big team of consultants, as I mentioned, that we've brought here today. So if you have any questions afterwards on transportation, planning, architecture, and the owner, they're all here. I'm really not going to say much else besides, I think Tracy did a tremendous job actually with her presentation. I'm excited about this proposal. We've worked hard at it over 3 years. We've worked closely with the councillor and we've met with the community. We've done what I believe we could to respond to their comments and concerns. It's a handsome building from my perspective. It's dealing with transition in a very positive way. And I think it's a great opportunity to introduce height and density in units that, you know, the committee is definitely talking about today, that the city desperately deserves and needs in a way that I think is very sensitive and appropriate. So I'll leave it there and I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Do members of the committee have any questions of the applicant? Vice Chair Gower?
Well, I think we can anticipate probably what we'll hear from the delegations based on the summary of public feedback in the report, which was around height and form, shadowing impact, privacy, traffic, and questions regarding tenure of the property. I'm not sure what that is, but are there any of those that you'd like to address, anticipating what we might hear from delegations?
I certainly can. So, I mean, with respect to the height and the density, the as of right height, as Ms. Scaramazino pointed out, is 14 stories. We're maintaining that. There is a presentation actually that we submitted, and if that actually can be brought up, I think it's slide 4 will give you an appreciation for the as of right. Keep going one more. There it is. So you can see in the top left corner, and you can zoom into if that is possible. But that image in the top left corner was prepared very early on in our pre-application consultations to help staff and anyone else who's interested understand the as of right development potential. So if without any amendments, that's the type of building and the type of height that can be put on this property. Now that building could go anywhere on the property. And I think conceivably, if we didn't have any other opportunities, you'd want to move it around. But conceivably, as of right, that's where the building can go and where the height can go. And so that impact, and I think it's relatively limited given the residential proximity that's across the street and off to the corner, is still there as of right. And so our goal in developing this property was to see what else can be put on the property that isn't going to generate more impact. And effectively, we've put that development in behind that as of right. And then we've worked on actually sculpting the building, and you can see it in the right image. All that transition in the building that's going to be in a height schedule is achieving and reducing even, I think, the impact that as of right image would have. And then I think there was a question about tenure. I think that's a question of like, is this a rental or condo property? The goal at this point in time is that at least one tower would be rental. I think there's a conceivable possibility that one of them could end up becoming condo, but the owner is not sure exactly even when this development is going to proceed forward. So that'll be assessed at that point in time.
Councilor Brockton?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for coming today. I thank Councillor Gower for just mentioning some of the key concerns that the public have raised and have consistently raised during the tenure of this application. I'll raise one with you now, and that is regarding the parking provisions that go along with this. The actual wording of the motion is the staff recommendation, Chair, is perhaps a little misleading because we're not approving 2 14-story towers today. As we've just heard, that's a given. They can build 2 towers right now at 14 stories, but one of the variances being requested is less parking than what's required. And so I just, in the form of, that's the context of my question, is about the concerns from the community about parking. We think that there will be a high demand for parking at this complex. And when this application was revised and resubmitted back to the city after the first round of public consultation where parking allocations were raised, the parking didn't go down. Sorry, it didn't go up, it went down. So the applicant provided even less parking. And the strong concern in the community, a community that abuts the golf club and a convention site, a minor convention site, is we already have parking issue. And so can you let me know if we get to the point where parking demand exceeds supply, you're beside an office tower with a grossly underutilized parking garage and surface parking lot, what is the plan that your client wants to take on to provide parking for their tenants and guests?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I mean, the parking supply here as anticipated with a lot of developments is always a question, right? You oversupply, then there's, you're not supporting the transportation initiatives of the city, you undersupply, there could be spillover concerns. At point 7, I think I would say that this development is not, it's typical, I guess, for a development that's not next to a transit station, for example. But this is what I could say is an evolving suburban neighborhood. So the justification behind the concern is legitimate. So the client has been looking at different options. So the simplest option is to build this 3rd story of underground parking, but that's a tremendous cost, as I think this committee knows. And they don't want to be in a situation where they've oversupplied only to find themselves 5-10 years in the future wishing they hadn't, and not being able to actually provide a reasonably affordable product because of that. So then the opportunity, and I think, Councillor, it was your idea originally, and I commend you for it, was to look at, is there alternatives around the area, and IBM has an oversupply of parking. They've had discussions with IBM. There seems to be interest on both sides to see about a lease agreement that would allow them to sort of bridge time. And if there is over demand when they develop, and that's the other question in this, like if it's far enough out, maybe the demand isn't there, but it's an ideal situation. And I think both parties are interested in pursuing it if the need is still presenting itself at that point in time. What I can tell you, just from my experience with Jennings and most developers, is they equally don't want to undersupply product or undersupply parking in their product, because their tenants are then just going to be frustrated and either go elsewhere or turn over regularly. So they have the shared interest that the community has in finding that right sweet spot. And so I think through time, with that opportunity that they've explored, they will be able to actually have an ideal situation where they could use that parking supply as long as it's truly needed and available.
Thank you for that, and thanks, Chair. And listen, I absolutely understand the equilibrium that's trying to be found when the cost of parking is underground parking is as high as it is. You don't want to, as you say, oversupply, but you also want to be a good developer and make sure that your tenants and guests have a place to park. So I understand that as well. I think what would provide my community and myself some comfort is whether there was an MOU signed between your client and IBM that basically says both parties are open to a relationship at some point in the future. We want to work in good faith, And should the demand for parking exceed what this residential complex is able to provide, both parties will then entertain or enter into more formal discussions. That at least signals to my community that our community isn't going to become a parking lot, that the people who have parking supply have signaled they're willing to have a more formal discussion in the future, and your client has taken the steps necessary at least in an informal basis to secure that as a possible site. That would bring me comfort to support this. I think the site needs to be developed. I'm very happy to see residential here. In my opinion, it's been a neglected site. It's not the Jennings fault, but this historic building that's been here. And I think you'll hear from delegations today that this continues to be a major concern. So I'll just leave it here. I really do like what I see before us. My comments are reflected in the staff report, but that is, I think, a legitimate concern. We've just heard Mr. Casagrande say the justification is legitimate. And that's what I'm looking for as we debate this morning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a quick couple of questions. What is the parking ratio again?
It's 0.7 for the residents and 0.1 for visitors.
Yeah, and I always question when people buy a place, they know what they're getting into, and then suddenly they have 10 extra cars. Well, that's a them problem. My major concern is, and they can keep paying the city for tickets, good on them. But at the same time, my major concern is, we're prioritizing emergencies. It's housing and not just deeply affordable. It's just getting housing built is the big issue. And I'd hate to see any delay in this project. But to the other question, it's related to the height. You're within right now, but would increasing height make this project a better project? Is there opportunities from that perspective to add more units? I'll be asking this a lot over the next couple of years because we need things built. Like we approve something here, but it takes many years before things get built. And every time we throw in 3 months, 6 months, suddenly supply is not keeping up. We're not keeping pace. So I want to make sure that we are keeping pace. Any response to that?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm glad you're asking that question in particular. It's the lens that I'm increasingly, if that won't surprise anybody here, but increasingly looking at with all of our projects. I couldn't even help but look at the one that was before you on 10th and know that there could have been opportunity to rationalize more height on that property. The challenge in this particular file is that in order to do that from a policy perspective, they would need to amend the official plan because the official plan direction says in the absence of zoning, which is as of right, if you're going to go higher, you have to have height around you that rationalizes that to simplify it. The other challenge is, of course, the airport authority. But to answer your question, if the committee and staff were prepared to consider an OPA, I think the airport authority limit would allow for an extra couple of stories on the property. And that would have to be explored and confirmed, but that's what I recall sort of early on when we were identifying options to the client. And, at some point in time, I think as the city looks at their official plan, there's these nuances, if you will, right? And these residential neighborhoods that I think sometimes dictate that the OP policies should be a little bit more flexible to contemplate these circumstances. So we don't have to go through an OPA, which of course triggers a much higher level of concern and consideration. So that's the reality of it, Councillor. We'd have to do an OPA, but we could probably get a couple more stories, which would probably translate into another, by my math, 80 units or something like that.
Good. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind as I listen to the delegations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I don't see any further questions, so thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
And we'll move into the public delegations, of which there are 6. Andre Grushman is going to be followed by Patrick Morton. Andre, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. And then at the conclusion of your presentation, colleagues will have an opportunity to ask questions if they choose.
Great, thank you.
Sometimes people get up immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous delegation for 1592 10th Line Road is a hard act to follow. I didn't bring any kids. I left my cat at home. However, I'd like to thank Councillor Brockington for his support through this process, and I think he's eloquently summed up the issues from our perspective. I'm a member of the Affordable Housing and Planning Committee of the Hunt Club Community Association, and we've been working on this file for almost a year. We've all brought very different perspectives to the table. As you'll hear today, some of us would even prefer low-rise housing on this side, missing middle housing. Others are perfectly happy with more density to address the housing crisis. But we've come together around a common position which was approved unanimously by our board in December. As an association, we recognize that the City of Ottawa is facing a housing crisis. We're not objecting to the height of the buildings, the design of the buildings, the floor space index, or the 3-meter setback. But we are concerned about the applicant's request to drastically reduce the number of parking spaces. I think, as you heard from the previous speaker, 0.7 is not typical for a site in this location. As a result, we'd ask this committee to approve a more appropriate parking standard for this site, or to mitigate the impact in other ways, such as the proposal that Councillor Brockington has made. We think it's a question of fairness to the local residents and consistency in the application of the bylaw. To be clear, we don't believe that parking standards are sacrosanct. We know that the city is working hard to promote public transit and to increase units. And we know that some spillover parking on nearby streets is inevitable. But the current zoning bylaw is based on the principle that the further you go from the downtown core, the more parking you need to provide. There's more car ownership in those areas. For this site on North Bowesville, which is located in Area C, the suburban area, the bylaw requires a minimum of 1.2 residential parking spaces and 0.2 visitor spaces, as you've heard. The applicant's proposal, however, would slash this parking ratio by 40% for residents, and it would provide only the bare minimum of required bicycle spaces. The total shortfall would be 225 parking spaces for a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. If approved, this site would have essentially the same parking standard as buildings in the downtown core, the 27-story Landmark Tower at 359 Kent Street, or the 20-story tower at 200 Isabella Street, across from the Queensway. Under the official plan, moreover, intensification is to be directed to hubs and corridors, particularly areas near rapid transit. This site is nowhere near a hub or a Main Street corridor or a transit line. In fact, North Bowesville Road is located at the very outer edge of the outer urban transect. It falls within a neighborhood designation, not within an evolving overlay, and it's 4 kilometers away from the nearest rapid transit station. And yet the proposed 0.7 parking standard is nearly the same as the 0.5 ratio applied to sites on Main Street corridors such as Baseline and Carling. For example, 1345 Baseline Road near the corner of Baseline and Maryville, 1640 Carling Avenue, which will host 6 towers of up to 40 stories, 780 Baseline at the corner of Fisher and Baseline. These sites are all located on future bus rapid transit lines. So why should a site on North Bowesville be treated as if it were one of these busy main streets? Other developers have consulted closely with the community and have complied with the intent of the bylaw. At 729 Ridgewood Avenue near Mooney's Bay, the developer is providing a parking ratio of 1.0 for a 20-story tower. And yet Ridgewood is only 2 kilometers away from this building and from an LRT station. Just this morning, as we heard, an apartment building on 10th Line Road was approved. It sits across from a major shopping center, and yet it provides 100% of the required parking for residents and visitors. Why should North Bowesville be treated differently? After meeting with residents, in fact, as we have heard, the applicant actually decreased the proposed number of parking spaces. And the applicant has also said that they don't intend to build for a number of years. So it's not as if shovels are about to enter the ground. For all these reasons, councillors, we would ask you to approve a more appropriate parking standard for this site, one that's fair to local residents and consistent with the intent of the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry to rush you at the end there, but we're out of time. Do members of the committee have questions for the delegation? Councillor Brockton?
Chair, I don't have a question because that delegation, I think, was an excellent summary of the analysis that the community as a whole has invested. That I'm quite gifted that
I apologize.
Good
for
morning.
pronunciation.
You can hear me okay?
We can. Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Oh, and you brought the dog. That's perfect.
I brought the dog. I saw I had to be competitive with cuteness, so I'll let her go now. So good morning, committee. Thanks for having us today. My name is Patrick. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing and Planning Committee with the Hunt Club Community Association. I actually had a slide deck. I don't know if that made its way in or not, if we're able to show that. But as Andre mentioned, we've been working on this for about a year. I'm really proud of the work that we did as a community to get all these diverse perspectives together. So as we mentioned, our main concern is the parking. And what I'm just going to do, I'm going to quickly look through the context here as someone who, I live very close to the site. I walk, I bike, I take transit here. So I just want to talk a bit about the context of how demand for parking might shape up, whether it's feasible to live without a car.
Patrick, they're just bringing your presentation up.
Great. Thanks. Could we go to the next slide then? So this is the site here. We're not quite in a 15-minute neighborhood. I would like to be, but the nearest grocery store is a 1.3 kilometer walk. And the walk's not the most pleasant. It's along the busy arterial through a couple of parking lots. I just want to mention there is a proposed additional development that's quite nearby. Obviously, you're not considering that today, but that's something that the community has been considering when looking at the traffic impacts. The intersection there, Hunt Club Riverside, is quite dangerous and has a failing rating. So next slide, please. For active transportation, the picture's a bit better. We can get to South Keys in the east. That's a fairly safe route. To go north, there's a missing link along Riverside Drive. It's a bit hard to see from the application here, but the green line is, I believe that's a plan. It's not, that doesn't exist at the moment. But you can get by bike through on Riverside Drive, but it is quite dangerous. It's not the most pleasant. But there are options. Next slide, please. Just to quickly talk about the transit options, we are quite far from any rapid transit. The Route 90 comes once every 15 minutes. It's about a 75% reliability rating as for the app that I use when I commute on that route. And it is best suited for commutes to go downtown or to go to the shopping center in South Keys. Connections elsewhere in the city are much more challenging. As you can see, you have to do that hike down to Hunt Club and then take the routes there depending where you're going. Next slide, please. And that's just to show that we're quite far from the rapid transit lines. We only have some potential isolated measures in the future. Next slide, please. For the forecasting in the transport impact assessment, we saw that the applicant didn't need to consider any spillover parking because they had anticipated a lower demand for cars. We just wanted to note that we thought it was a little bit unreasonable to assume that transit uptake would be so high, at least when the project is completed in the context that it's in, that I've shown you. And that's because, and I did have to do some digging. I only had access to the 2009 version, but it looks like the neighborhood that they use for the baseline for demand here is, as you can see on the map, is most of those high rises are quite close to rapid transit at South Keys. Next slide, please. So the staff report mentions that this application is going to be implementing key parts of the official plan and key policy objectives, which are objectives we support. Frankly, we know we need more housing. This is a housing crisis. We just want to object a little bit on the fairness of how this is being done. That we believe we should expedite the zoning bylaw review, rather than focus on implementing it piecemeal. If we're going to be dropping parking minimums, that's fantastic. That's great. We should do that. It's just a little unfair to drop it in one location. A little unfair to the residents there. Next slide, please, quickly. Sorry, and this is just the zoning map of the nearby neighborhood. So I just wanted to end by saying we support incremental increases to zoning, and we think that should be on a broader base across the city. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morton. I'm checking to see if members of the committee have any questions for you, which they don't. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning.
Thanks.
Peter Brimacombe is next. I apologize again if I've mispronounced that, followed by John Reed. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
And I've cut it down to 1 minute. And it's basically that I went door to door on Chatsworth, which is the low residential area immediately adjacent to the proposed development. And the point that I made with them was that the reduction in the parking requirement from 1.2 to 0.7 was unfair. And that the people I talked to agreed. And they think it's unfair. So that's the main point that I want to make.
Thank you. Just checking to see if any members of the committee have any questions for you. A very succinct presentation. I don't see any. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Mr. Reed, who will be followed by Audrey Bélanger-Barr.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors. I do not have twins or a dog, but I do have my teddy bear, which I hope will be adequate to give you that sort of emotional lift. I'm a long-time resident living within 300 meters of this proposed development. I support the proposal, but with a reservation. This area is not close to amenities, as stated on page 10 of the report to this committee and council by Planning Services. And I'm referring specifically to services of the Ottawa Public Library, which are ignored in the report. The nearest OPL branch is Greenborough, which is 5.7 kilometers distant on foot, or 30 minutes by bus. And that means that a parent taking their kid to story time spends twice as long on the bus as at the event. The next nearest branches are Alta Vista, which is a 40-minute bus ride, and Emerald Plaza, 45 minutes. Now, the average distance inside the Greenbelt to a library branch is 2.8 kilometers. So this development is twice as distant as the average. That's probably the worst library access within the Greenbelt. Is that what's meant by close to amenities? Or perhaps the planning services don't consider libraries an amenity? Why should future residents of this Jennings Brothers proposal not have reasonably equitable access to the library service they'll be paying for? What we have is an apparent example of siloed thinking, a disconnect between planning and the library. This kind of lack of amenity is an example of why residents of this proposed development are more likely to want personal transportation. You know, laudable as the official plan goal is to encourage residents to be less dependent on private vehicles. That only works if public transportation options are reliable and reasonably convenient. Well, reliability can be fixed, but it remains inconvenient for travel from this development to any present library branch. You can get into the situation, as happened with Prohibition in the US, where pursuing a worthy objective led to widespread problems. And I anticipate parking in the vicinity being one of those problems. If there were a library branch at or near the Hunt Club Riverside Park Community Center, it would be 2 kilometers distant walking and 10 minutes by bus. The Community Association has been requesting this, and it has been ignored by the city for decades. With this continuing lack of will by the city to provide the area with a reasonably convenient library service, I ask that no deviation from the presently applicable minimum parking requirement be granted, or as at a minimum, the MOU suggested by Councillor Brockington be implemented. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Reid, thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Brockington has a question for you.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Reid for illustrating an important point that he and a number who serve on a working group in River Ward raise, and that is our access to basic city services, in this case, library services. River Ward is one of few wards without a library branch, and their group have done some very good work at mapping out how long it takes people now, particularly by bus, to get to branches in the other wards. So he's illustrating a point that despite our best intentions to rebuild the city into 15-minute neighborhoods, it still has a set of challenges that he's illustrating today. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Reid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Dr. Reid, I see no further questions for you. Thank you very much for your presentation this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moving on then to Audrey, and we'll find out who is with Audrey, who will be then followed by our last delegation, Joanne. Ms. Belanger-Bauer, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. And you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. This is Mr. Mittens, a cat who loves to go outside but is terrified of high-speed vehicles. So my name is Audrey Belanger-Bauer, and I would first like to state how pleased I am at the prospect of welcoming 392 new families to our neighborhood. Given the environmental, housing, and affordability crisis that plague our city, including our neighborhood, a high-density housing development that provides more housing options is good. Not to mention that additional supply is crucially needed since local rents have nearly doubled in less than a decade in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is also gentrifying from a lack of supply. Most residents could not afford to buy or rent their own home at current market rates. The HCCA regularly receives emails from families in search of housing, and we know the need exists urgently now. And we know for a fact that there are many people who would love to live here, making this a good location for smart densification. The bylaw amendments sought to allow more housing are reasonable and should be approved. The main concern of the HCCA is that we are less keen on welcoming a horde of new space-hungry cars into our streets while we already struggle with life-sucking traffic. Cars are loud, they're unpleasant, they're polluting, and people bring life, connections, and a stronger sense of community. And these are legitimate concerns. They shouldn't be carelessly dismissed. The HCCA brief included options developed by our housing committee, who have been commendable in exploring all facets of concerns. The recommendations were adopted unanimously, but there was some dissent in the area of parking, namely mine, because I'm an avid amateur urbanist. I don't personally believe that additional parking is necessary to guarantee the successful integration of the proposed development in our community. Rather, I think the success is entirely dependent on the forward thinking and successful planning of the city, and that's ultimately you. The best way to avoid car dependency, a ton of traffic, and streets overflowing with parked cars is to offer alternatives so new residents do not need to buy cars in the first place to go about their everyday business. If we do not have additional bus lines like the new Route 91 that OC Transpo proposed, and protected cycling infrastructure from the development to nearby services, the concerns of residents heard today will be completely vindicated. Not increasing parking yields high benefits. It supports more affordable housing, as additional parking can cost up to $100K per unit. It promotes active transportation, helps alleviate the environmental crisis, and makes residents healthier and happier. It is more inclusive also for children and elderly residents who cannot drive, in alignment with the city's official plan. We are in a housing affordability crisis, environmental crisis. The city's in a financial crisis, needing more sustainable and less costly infrastructure, and we need to take both action. When densification is done right, we can solve all of these crises, one development at a time. But it needs to be an opportunity. It needs to be something that where services are brought in so that you can take me out of my car, so I don't contribute to that traffic, and that the residents who do need to drive are able to do so easily. Riverside is a hostile environment for cyclists and pedestrians. Uplands Drive is a high-speed danger for our children, and there are parks on that street. Hunt Club Road is a death trap with a bicycle gutter that disappears without warning. And we need to make these more complete streets safe for all road users for this development to be a real success. The development, in my personal opinion, is well located for that 50 neighborhood aspiration because it is within 10 minutes bike ride from most services that will be needed. The library is a little bit further, but you can still access it in less than half an hour by bike and on mostly safe routes. Otherwise, if we don't do this, the negative externalities on our neighborhood will definitely materialize. Hopefully, we can bridge the parking issue with the parking garage nearby. It's a big risk for residents in our community. We only have a voice over whether there's more parking added today through the zoning bylaw amendment, when what we really need is for the city, for you, to step up its planning game and have high-density projects systematically trigger a transportation review to align nearby roads with the city's TMP, complete street designs, and the official plan to move a higher volume of people safely and conveniently. I would like to see a motion that reflects this, to refer this to the Transportation Committee because we have high density propositions in a small area, so that the Riverside Drive, Hunt Club Road, Uplands Drive can be reviewed and plans drawn out to improve service levels by 2030. And that would go a long way in sustainably addressing the car problem for our community. I personally support the zoning bylaw amendment because it's a step in the right direction to address our many crises, and we can't afford more delays. However, it will be a disaster locally if the city does not do its part with comprehensive planning. New residents don't need to have cars, but they will if we don't ensure that there are safe and convenient alternatives to them. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Audrey. I just want to thank you so much for coming and for your really thoughtful delegation. I've really been impressed with all of the delegations from your community association. And I think you're really hitting on an important point. I know this is something Councillor Kitts brings up all the time, that we end up in a chicken and egg situation when it comes to intensification and transportation planning. But I don't think that the lack of a transportation plan should hold up building more homes, because those homes will take some time to build. But I do want to let you know that, Councillor Tierney is on this call as the chair of Transportation Committee. I'm going to be a member of the new this councillor sponsors group for the Transportation Master Plan Part 2. And I do think it's really, really important from a transportation perspective that we take a very close look at where intensification is to make sure that our transportation network is growing along with all the new development that's coming in. And also Councillor Brockington, Councillor Johnson, all of the councillors in the outer urban wards have been huge advocates and have really been raising awareness about the lack of active transportation facilities and basic sidewalks in a lot of these older suburban neighborhoods. And that's certainly top of mind for me as we start negotiating the second part of the Transportation Master Plan, because we need a retrofit program for roads that may not be old enough to dig up to put in new sewers and therefore turn into complete streets, but where there's a lot of intensification happening. So just to let you know, your concerns are very top of mind for me, and I think for a lot of members of this committee. And hopefully that's something we can tackle so that we're pairing good transportation planning with good intensification and housing planning. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really quickly, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I agree with a lot of what you just said. If you tune into this committee regularly, you'll hear me talk about how I feel that often the planning vision we have for the city doesn't match the reality of where we're building. And without those complete communities, without amenities close by, without transit, those nice ideas on paper really fall apart. So as Councillor Trotzer said, I think this is something that many of us are paying attention to. And I just want to thank you for being here and highlighting that today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I too want to thank Audrey for her presentation. She is the president of the local community association for the past few years and has brought a progressive lens or an additional progressive lens to the association as well as other directors. So I want to thank her and acknowledge that. Audrey, I believe there's a legitimate concern that there may not be sufficient parking at the site. You did talk about, or at least my colleague talked about, as a chicken and egg. We absolutely want to evolve our whole active transportation and transportation plans and move not just this community, but the city in the right direction, sort of modern direction. How do you address or what can you suggest how we deal with the issue? Should it be an issue, let's just say the first 10 years, 15 years, where parking demand far exceeds supply? How do you envision this be addressed?
Thank you, Riley. So first, I really appreciated your intervention about having an MOU with the nearby parking garage that is available. I think that's a key component to bridge that gap if it exists in the coming years. Most importantly, we're planning at this stage. We know that this development is not coming next year. It's not coming the year after. It's coming in a few years. We have time to plan these alternatives, to put in some basic protected infrastructure so that cycling isn't scary for me. As somebody who has recovered from a brain injury, I am terrified at the idea that I could be cycling in a place where a car could hit me because the driver is momentarily distracted or something goes wrong. I shouldn't be putting my life at risk when I'm alleviating traffic for others. And if we want our new neighbors at this location to be able to bike to Metro in the middle of the neighborhood, which is only 2 kilometers away, bike to TNT, go to the doctor's offices and the vision clinics, which are nearby, go to the restaurants that are on Riverside Drive and just access bank. We have 3 LRT stations that would be accessible by bike. We need to make it easy and convenient for people to use those. I will use it. But if that infrastructure doesn't exist when the developments open up for residents to move in, we'll be too late. They'll have cars and we'll be stuck in this cycle. It needs to happen first.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Audrey, I don't see any further questions for you from members. So thank you very much for a very thoughtful intervention that certainly I think most people would understand I have significant sympathy for. So appreciate that. Our last public delegation on this item is Joanne Levay. Joanne, if you're here, you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee and members of the public for providing this opportunity for comments, concerns, suggestions, and most of all, collaboration, because this is what it's about. I also want to do a special thank you and shout out to Councillor Brockington. He has received many a terse email from me. And I do want to say that I know he is working hard on this zoning request. And I do want to say in person, even though it's Zoom, I do want to say I do appreciate your hard work, and I'm not trying to suck up to you. It's just if you have something nice to say it. So I am saying it. A lot of people have already shared their concerns and suggestions about traffic, parking. And I also want to bring up health, because that is an issue as well, right? Cars, exhaust, the dirt, everything. It's not great on people's health. Noise, another one. Noise pollution, which I always talked about or heard about in schools, and that is a pollution of sorts, right? Noise. So I get all the sides, both sides. We want to improve our transportation. We want to rely less on cars. But in terms of my background, I'll say I live on Chatsworth. Surprise. So Kelly, if anybody wants my contact information, Andre, Patrick, Peter, John, Audrey, Connor especially, I'm more than happy to have you share it with them. But I do want to address the fact that I've lived in Montreal for 25 years. I've lived in Toronto for 16 years. And January 2008, I moved to Ottawa, and I've been here for, I think this is my 16th year. I will say this, when I lived in Toronto and I moved here, the Welcome to Ottawa sign said population 750,000. So I get the fact that we need housing. What I'm concerned about is the parking. I'm seeing it already now, where cars are lined up along uplands. And when they do have a big event at the formerly Tudor Hall, cars are parked everywhere, on the grass by the IBM building, and of course on both sides of the street on Chatsworth. So health also means emergency vehicles. If cars are parked on both sides of Chatsworth, emergency vehicles, two-way traffic could not happen. So that is a concern for me. So I look at this whole building as the planning stage, the journey stage, and then the outcome. I also wanted to talk about the journey, and that's if there's some way, like Connor asked, if we can have some sort of wall put up while construction is going on, that would be most appreciated. Trucks are going to be going by there every day. Debris is going to be pushed up. And I, for one, I wouldn't appreciate that. I am speaking from myself, or maybe I'm representing Chatsworth residents. I would love to collaborate with the builders. I would love to be able to chat with them, find out their plans during the journey so that I'm prepared and so that my neighbors are prepared. But getting back to the parking, last I checked, we have a really, really intense winter season. And I'm really seeing very few bicycles on the bike lanes that are provided in the outskirts of the downtown core. I mean, we don't live in Holland, where people, that's their main mode of transportation is cycling. And my best friend lives there, so I know. And in Toronto, I will say, when I wanted to go downtown, because I lived in the upper area of Toronto, I never thought twice about taking my car. I did not take my car because parking was hell. I would take public transportation because I knew it would get me there fast and efficiently. Unfortunately, having been in Ottawa since 2008, I'm just not seeing or feeling that. And you're taking it from somebody who's lived in 3 different areas of the city. Oh, am I over? Oh, sorry. So I'm just saying that is a challenge. I've taken public transportation downtown. It's not fun. With the LRT breaking down, I always second guess, should I take public transportation, or is it going to take me an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to my destination, which is downtown Ottawa? So the parking is going to be scary, and transportation is another concern of mine. And like I said, a wall, something, so we have some privacy while the construction's going on would be great. Anyways, thank you for listening. I appreciate everyone's contribution, and I'm getting all these kind of looks. So I think it's the hook taking me off stage. So I appreciate you listening though.
Thank you, Ms. LeVay. Councillor Brockington has a question for you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Joanne, for your delegation today. I just wanted to say, jump ahead a bit here that before construction starts, what I normally host in communities is what I call a construction mitigation meeting, where the proponent, their contractors, community, myself sit down and we talk about how to make it as pleasant an experience as possible, but ways to mitigate impact on the community. And I would commit to doing that as well. And the other comment I'll
Thank you.
make at this time is, should on-street parking on Chatsworth become an issue, again, there are ways that we can sit down and talk about some options, and that's my commitment to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I already have ideas, but you're the experts, right? This is a great information session for me, having never sat on these kinds of committees before. So, and to conversate with, is that a word? Anyways, thank you very much. And I appreciate that, Councillor Barkington. Thank you so much.
It's a word now. Ms. LeVay, I don't see any further questions for you from committee members, so thank you very much for your intervention this morning. Members of committee, the opportunity is now to have questions for staff. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, as well, for some good questions and discussion so far. Two issues I just want to go over with staff. We'll get to parking in a second. The intersection of Bowesville and Uplands has been raised many times, that this application has been before us. And the issue is when, first of all, North Bowesville is a dead end street. So the only way in and out of the street is via Uplands Drive. And Uplands Drive is about 150 meters from Riverside. So very close to the Riverside Uplands intersection. And so in the morning in particular, as people are leaving the community by car and other means, there's quite a queue that happens here. And exiting Bowesville can be tricky. Can staff just talk me through how this intersection in particular was analyzed? People have raised concerns with Uplands and Riverside and further south at Hunt Club. But the one I want to focus my comments on today, Chair, is Bowesville and Uplands. Talk to me about the type of assessment that was undertaken. Are there safety concerns that staff have identified, and are there improvements that will be implemented once the development is built, because the city is acknowledging that there are some issues here? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. I don't have the specifics. Unfortunately, I'm not a transportation expert or transportation project manager. I do rely on our transportation team to review the reports that are submitted with an application. And I did speak to my colleague throughout the review of the application, and most recently preparing for this meeting, to ask about concerns or any additional comments that they did have. And I was told, just in general terms, and I apologize, I don't have the specifics. I can get those to you later this week. But I was told that there's no concerns in terms of looking at the additional traffic that will be generated from the development. That obviously there are high levels of traffic on Riverside, on Hunt Club. There are arterial roads. That's what they're designed to do. Uplands is not one of those, but it still does have, a reasonable amount of traffic on it. And I've been told that, that the amount of additional traffic that will be generated is not too much for the roads to handle. And I hopefully have my colleague is listening right now. I'm hoping that he's going to chime in and provide some answers, and perhaps in a few minutes I'll be able to give you some more information.
Yeah, I was wondering if, in the interest of time, I could request that a memo be circulated to the committee so that we could have a better understanding of, like I said, the analysis that was undertaken, the volumes that are projected, particularly at rush hour, how staff anticipate cars exiting Bowesville will intersect with the traffic on Uplands. It's been a continued issue that the community raises. And, you know, in a 24-hour period, it's not an issue. That the traffic coming out of Bowesville is a fraction of total traffic. I understand that, but there are periods where you've got the gas station across the road that has its own exit lane. You've got a bus stop on the other side of this intersection. There's a lot going on that people have raised. So would staff honor my request that a memo be circulated between now and council that addresses this question?
That would be fine. I've actually just received a comment from my colleague. He's listening in and he said certainly that that they can do that.
Fair enough. Thank you. The other question I want to pose to you today is your support for a reduced minimum parking ratio. No one in the community is asking for the ratio to go above the council supported minimum ratios. What people are saying is the minimum ratio for residential is 1.2 and a visitor 0.2. That's what people are questioning is staff's support to go lower. So could you just expand on that? Why this particular development at this particular location, when other delegates spoke to other developments, even within River Ward, where the parking ratio is higher, closer to transit, this is further away, and staff are supporting a reduced ratio. Could you just expand your thinking on that point, please?
Sure. Thanks, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. Just to start off, as I'm sure most of you are aware, each application is reviewed on their own merits. And so, yes, there are other files that perhaps have provided a greater amount of parking. In this case, we look at it as the application was presented to us with a reduction in parking in this area. As you know, there are a lot of policies in the official plan that do support a reduction in parking. The zoning team is also currently reviewing the entire City of Ottawa zoning bylaw, which will likely result in a reduction of parking requirements in various areas across the city. There, as you've mentioned, there is sort of that chicken and egg, cat and mouse type of scenario where, you know, there's a requirement to support transit. And if everybody is provided with a parking space and people choose to have a car, it's not going to encourage people to take alternate modes, which is going to leave us basically in the same situation that we are in now. When we get to the site plan stage, there will be some things that we discuss with the applicant, and some of those would be having a car sharing service in the parking garage to allow those that do need occasional cars to have access to one quite easily. Something else that will be in the purchase and sale agreement or in the leasing agreement with the applicant is there'll be a notice in there to advise the potential resident that what the parking rates are and what parking is available to them if they are able to obtain parking or not. And so it would be my thought that if somebody needs a car and they've been told at their future home that they're not going to be having a parking space, and we'll also be letting them know that they cannot rely on street parking as a long-term solution to a parking, like a lack of personal parking for themselves, that I would assume that they would not choose to move there if it doesn't meet their needs. And that's something that I just think makes sense. If you need a car and you don't get a parking space and you can't rely on street parking, then you look elsewhere. And as I think as Mr. Casagrande mentioned, the applicant is also well aware of what is driving the market right now and what consumers are looking for, and would not be proposing something that is not going to sell or that's not going to rent, because that would not make good business sense. And also another point that was mentioned as well, providing parking, underground parking also significantly increases the cost of the units. So again, that would be a cost that would be passed on to the residents in the building, which makes them less affordable than what they would be if there wasn't parking. So again, residents would have that option of paying more to have a parking space. So there's many different options available in terms of OC Transpo. They are circulated on development applications, and they are constantly assessing the routes and the services that they provide, obtaining information through ridership numbers and also through the drivers to find out how routes are operating, and they can tweak the routes. But I definitely can see that increasing transit, improving transit reliability is obviously a huge factor to help any of these projects succeed.
The irony is that until a few weeks ago, OC Transpo cut this route that serves this community. The Route 90 was going to come off of Riverside and Uplands. And through my interventions and summarizing community concerns, that was saved. But there was not going to be any bus that connected this development with Herdman Station, where it goes now, so people can get on the LRT. The replacement was simply a neighborhood loop. And it's a bit of a head scratcher. But my last question is, can you talk about raising the possibility of an MOU with the proponent in your discussions with the proponent and or their consultant? Did you raise the possibility of entering into an MOU or at least talking to IBM about the possibility of security parking? And I say I'm absolutely in agreement that a developer shouldn't build parking that isn't going to be used. That's just an added cost that they have to carry. It's reflected in the rents or the price of the housing, and we want to find that sweet spot equilibrium. I completely get that that concern, but we need a plan B just in case. And when you see the amount of parking right next door that is underutilized, a parking garage, surface parking, hundreds of spots, literally right next door. If I was the builder, I'd be like, I would actually want to see how much of that I can use for my development, a long-term lease, and not have to build as much underground parking at a huge cost when the parking already exists. But can you just elaborate what work you did in that regard, if any?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. No, I did not speak to them about using the IBM building. I was aware of your conversations with them, but I did not discuss that with them. I was comfortable with the reduction in parking that was being proposed.
Okay, I guess, Chair, my last thoughts are, I want to see this site developed. I want to see residential here. I'm not opposed to the 14 stories. I'm going to reserve my vote today until I can get some more information on the parking. What my community is asking for is that the minimum ratios be respected. In fact, I wouldn't even push on the visitor parking. I'm probably okay with 0.1. So today I'm not going to support this, but I hope that with additional information between now and council, and whether the proponent has additional conversations with IBM, if something even informally can be secured that can provide my community with comfort, knowing that there is a plan B, that's probably will push me over the line to support this. But today I want to respect the comments that we've received and hope that between now and council, more information can be provided. Thank you.
So my understanding is city staff are prepared to address some of that traffic or parking now. Am I right on that, Lily? We have some staff available, so.
Yes, Chair, the responsible transportation review staff is available to speak to the transportation review if it is required by the committee and the chair.
Sir.
Well, I don't want to take up committee's time here, but my question was relating to the intersection in particular. So if staff can provide answers now, that would be great. Or if they want to follow up by a memo, I'm open to either.
Yes, Mike Jianpai is available to speak. Mike, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can give a brief explanation of the intersection of Bowesville and Uplands. And it is unsignalized, but it is still measured by level of service, which is the A to F that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And it uses delay. So it was analyzed in the original TIA from 2020 2022 or 2020. I can't quite remember. I apologize. But it turns out that the level of service for all movements is A and B, so it varies. So there's really no issue getting in and out of that road, at least according to the analysis in the TIA.
Thank you very much, Mike. Councillor Tierney?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a really great delegation of, well, animals and children and a lot of great stuff. That was a lot of fun. Please, no reptiles. I'm afraid of bats. But that being said, I think there's been a lot of really good discussion where there's this gray area. And again, I'll talk about the fact that the applicant makes it very clear if you want parking or not. So when you sign on the dotted line, you either know you have parking or you're not. They're not hiding it. You're making a conscious decision to live a lifestyle that a lot of people more today than they did even a decade ago want. They want that ability. At the same time, great work by the local councillor on transit. I think those are some things that are certainly notable, have to be addressed to ensure that there's routes. And, again, hearing also short-term parking, those rental cars. I have heard from the applicant, yes, they're looking into that. They want to, there's a lot of people that really don't need vehicles. They don't have the expense, don't have licenses, simply because they don't want to take on the burden of, let's face it, driving a car is very expensive. It's not cheap by any means. And they don't have the ability to be able to do that, or they simply want to break away from fossil fuel vehicles or whatever the case may be and make that conscious decision. So they know what they're doing. I find in this discussion, we're really, are we advocating for parking versus housing? Like, that's where I'm at a real crossroads here, and I'm not going to allow that to sway the conversation. I think we need units more than parking spots at this point. So for all those reasons, I will be supporting this wholeheartedly, this application, and we're going to have many more of these, and we'll have to have these similar discussions. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. Vice Chair Gower?
Thanks, Chair. I guess I'm building on Councillor Tierney's comments. I hope we're not heading down a route where we would be holding this up, looking for an MOU with the neighboring building. I don't think that'd be appropriate. By all means, the applicants could explore it. It might be an option. I remember a few years ago asking our policy staff where our parking minima comes from. Where does that policy come from? What's it based on? And this is not a slight on staff, but they said, we're really not sure. Currently, it stems from the 2008 zoning bylaw. It was probably carried through from pre-amalgamation bylaws that were in existence, which were probably carried through from previous bylaws, which may have gone back to a engineering handbook. There are assumptions all over the place about where parking should be, but the origin of these minima come from a time before we were talking about climate change, before we were talking about active transportation. I think even when we weren't even focused on transit, it was at the expense of a car-centered thinking around planning. So there's a lot of cities that are completely eliminating parking minimums, as we know. Edmonton has done it, Minneapolis, St. Paul, many, many others. And we may be heading down that path soon as well. We'll see. But too much parking leads to lower density, less affordability, more cars, more traffic, fewer people choosing transit. We're addicted to parking right now. And I think staff is right in their assessment that this is reasonable based on the application in front of us and the market forces and the actual demand that exists for parking. So I'll support the staff application. And yes, you're right, Councillor Tierney. We'll be discussing this again and again over the next few months. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Yeah, we are approving most of our housing in this city with parking, despite the trends. Most of the units for which zoning amendments are being made to facilitate their construction are being built with parking, despite all of the trends globally. And I think that's, That's certainly a nod to what residents are asking us to do, but it's out of sort to the long-term environmental and economic sustainability of our city. So I am more than happy to vote in favor of a development that seeks to reduce the parking minimum to a 0.7, which is still a lot of new parking being built. I don't see any other hands up. Questions? Did you want to yay and nay? Is this item carried? With the dissent from Councillor Brock. All right, thank you, colleagues. I believe that is the end of the development applications today. Thank you very much, Tracy, for all your work on the file. Thank you very much to the members of the public who came out to speak to that as well. What am I doing? Don't know. 5.7 and 5.8. So I've asked for a joint presentation on the 2 land surveys. So we'll consider the vacant industrial and business park land survey, as well as the Greenfield residential land survey. These are routine reports, but I wanted to put a focus on them. Oh, and is that a technical motion? It is. It says right there, technical amendment. Vice Chair Gower, do you have a technical motion associated with these items?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the reminder. Whereas document 1 lists the inventory of vacant industrial and business park lands, and whereas the appendix in document 1 is missing number labels from map number 9, 24, 27, 28, 102, 107, 109, and 112. And whereas table 2B incorrectly shows that vacant net rural industrial and logistics land in South Gloucester is 40.8 net hectares and vacant net rural industrial and logistics land is 397.1 net hectares. Therefore, be it resolved that document 1 be amended to include number labels for maps 9, 24, 27, 28, 102, 107, 109, and 112. And therefore be it further resolved that table 2B in document 1 appendix be amended to vacant net rural industrial and logistics land in South Gloucester is 36.7 net hectares and vacant net rural industrial and logistics land is 393.1 net hectares.
It would be amazing if we needed a technical amendment to amend the technical amendment.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have. Royce, the committee is waiting. We are in your hands.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for providing this opportunity to provide a presentation on the vacant industrial land supply and the Greenfield residential land supply. Our presentation is in reverse order on the agenda, so we will start with the Greenfield land survey first and then move on to the industrial. I'd like to introduce Eva Walron. She's our Senior Planner in Research and Forecasting. Now turn it over to Eva.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So as Royce mentioned, I'll be presenting information on our Greenfield residential land survey mid-2022 update, as well as the vacant industrial land survey mid-2022 update, focusing on the calculations we made to obtain land supply to mid-year 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, so we begin with the Greenfield residential land survey. The new official plan divides the urban area into 2 categories, the built-up area and the Greenfield area. And the Greenfield land survey monitors the residential land supply within the Greenfield area. And the Greenfield area of itself is Greenfield residential supply is separated into 2 categories: existing designated Greenfield supply and council adopted urban expansion areas. And so the Greenfield residential land survey report updates the Greenfield supply to July 1st, 2022. Next slide, please. So as we can see from this map, the Greenfield area is represented, the existing designated Greenfield urban area is represented by the dark green parcels on the map, and the council adopted urban expansion areas are represented in the pink sort of hatched color on the map. Next slide, please. So just as an overview of how we calculated existing designated supply, we began with the land supply at the period beginning with July 1st, 2021, where the supply stood at 1,587.3 hectares, which accommodated roughly 69,078 dwelling units. The first step was to remove land from greenfield housing starts over the 12-month period between mid-2021 and mid-2022. And then we recalculated land supply based on new proposed developments that applications that we received. And also supply was calculated based on changes to existing development applications, and some changes that impacted supply came from changes to units, dwelling types, land area, as well as proposed density. Next slide, please. If we take a closer look at housing starts between mid-2021 and mid-2022, there were 4,258 housing starts on greenfield parcels. If you look at the the table to the right, we see that overall townhouse units had the highest share of starts by type with 56%. And the 4,258 housing starts occurred on 109.9 net hectares of land. Next slide, please. In terms of distribution of housing starts, Kanata-Stittsville led all areas with 33.5% of land developed, followed by South Nepean at 24.4%. The combined southern neighborhoods of South Nepean, Riverside South, and Leitrim comprise 54% of greenfield land consumption, and Orleans had the smallest proportion at 13%. Next slide, please. Looking at an update from existing applications. So adjustments from planning applications resulted in an increase in the 2021 supply by 4.8 hectares. Land removed from housing starts was 109.9 hectares, leaving us with a total greenfield supply at July 1st, 2022 of 1,482.2 hectares. Kanata-Stittsville has the most supply with 488 hectares, followed by Riverside South at 431.6 hectares. And this accommodated a total estimated unit potential of 64,786 units. Next slide, please. If we take a closer look at the official plan urban expansion areas, so the official plan projected approximately 181,800 new dwellings in the urban area to 2046. And this growth would be accommodated through a combination of intensification and greenfield development. Out of the three scenarios presented in the official plan, Council adopted the balanced growth scenario, which called for 51% of total urban growth through intensification and 49% of total urban growth through greenfield development. So if we look at the table to the right, the 51% intensification would result in approximately 92,100 urban dwellings, and the 49% in the greenfield area would result in approximately 89,700 urban dwellings. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the greenfield would accommodate 89,700 dwellings. In 2018, designated greenfield area could accommodate 66,300 dwellings, and the remainder would be accommodated in the the council adopted urban expansion lands, 23,300. Next slide, please. So to calculate the land that would be required to accommodate the 23,300 urban expansion dwellings, the 23,300 units were redistributed by unit type to provide unit totals by dwelling type. A 5-year average density was applied by dwelling type to each type of dwelling to arrive at total land area by dwelling type. And these land areas by dwelling type were summed to arrive at a total of 640.5 total net hectares available for residential development. As a part of the new official planning process, a study was conducted on the net to growth ratios, in complete communities, and that study found that the net to growth ratio for complete communities was roughly 50%, meaning that 50% of the development would be residential uses and 50% of the development would be non-residential uses. So that 50% net to gross ratio was applied to the 640.5 net hectares to arrive at a total gross expansion land area of 1,281 gross hectares. Next slide, please. And just sort of a repeat of the previous table, just focusing though that the Greenfield Residential Land Survey would be monitoring the 640.5 net residential hectares. Next slide, please. So taking a look at total greenfield supply, the table on the right identifies the greenfield residential supply by area as of July 1st, 2022. Existing designated greenfield supply was 1,482.2 net hectares, and the council adopted urban expansion areas were 640.5 net hectares for a total greenfield residential supply of 2,122.7 net hectares. Next slide, please. So taking a look at projected residential demand of the land to accommodate the units, the provincial policy statement has a minimum requirement of 15 years supply of land to accommodate residential growth. Over the next 15 years, the official plan projects to have 51,684 greenfield dwellings, and that works out to an annual average of 3,446 dwellings. So to calculate the land to accommodate these 3,446 dwellings, a 5-year average density of dwelling types was applied to total projected units by dwelling type to arrive at a net land hectare per dwelling type. And these totals were summed to arrive at a total of 93.1 total land required to accommodate 3,446 projected units per year. Next slide, please. So just looking at the city supply of land versus the provincial policy statement requirements, to meet the 15-year supply requirement for greenfield lands, the mid-2020 land supply was 1,488.2 net hectares. The annual demand, which we just calculated, was 93.1 net hectares, and that provides for a 15.9-year supply of greenfield land in the existing designated greenfield lands. That will be topped up also by the 9.4 years that currently exists in the council adopted urban expansion lands. Another requirement of the provincial policy statement is for a 3-year supply of registered and draft approved greenfield lands with servicing capacity. As of mid-2022, the land supply of this type of land stood at 715.5 net hectares. And if we apply the annual demand rate of 93.1, that leaves us with 7.7 years supply worth of registered and draft approved greenfield land with servicing capacity. So in both cases, the city land meets and surpasses the 15-year and 3-year supply of land outlined required by the PPS. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we find that greenfield land supply is tracking closely with the growth projections of the new official plan. The existing designated greenfield residential supply exceeds the 15-year PPS requirement. And as we begin the secondary planning processes, we can add an additional 640.5 net hectares will be made available through the council adopted urban expansion area development for a total of 2,122.7 net hectares. And this provides a projected land supply of approximately 25 years to 2047. Next slide, please. So taking a look at our vacant industrial land survey, this report reports on the inventory of vacant industrial and business park land in the urban and rural areas of the city. It monitors the supply and land consumption on employment lands. And the mid-2022 report examined employment lands under the previous official plan and the impact of the new industrial lands designations on the employment areas in the new official plan. Next slide, please. So there were 3 new categories of industrial land designated in the new official plan: the industrial and logistics designated land, mixed industrial designated land, and rural industrial and logistics designated land. So industrial and logistics designated lands are applied mainly to those parcels of land that are more traditional industrial uses, where you would see more noxious uses in terms of smell, light, noise. Examples of this type of designation would be for warehousing, distribution, and construction. The mixed industrial designation were applied to lands that basically were a transition from the more traditional industrial to less noxious uses. Examples of this type of designation would include light industrial, small scale office, and wholesale. And the rural industrial and the logistics designation are lands that support noxious uses, but they're not suitable for the urban area or the rural countryside. Next slide, please. Okay, so focusing on the new official plan and the industrial and logistics designation, the new official plan projected approximately 189,400 new jobs to 2046. So it's estimated that 9% of this growth, or 19,700 of those jobs, would be industrial related. And of that 19,700, over 80%, or 16,000, were to occur within industrial and mixed industrial designations. And further, most of these, or 12,200, were estimated to occur on industrial and logistics designations. Next slide, please. So to calculate the amount of land that would be needed to accommodate the 12,200 jobs outlined in the new official plan, we applied density ranges to the 12,200 jobs. So the densities that we applied were 25 jobs per net hectare for warehouse and fulfillment related uses, and 35 jobs per net hectare for research and development oriented business parks. Once we applied those density ranges, we arrived at a range of land demand of 363 to 507 hectares required to 2046. So in 2018, the vacant industrial land preserved primarily for industrial uses stood at 382 hectares. And so that was felt to be close to the low range of 363. So council added 140 net hectares of additional industrial land for a total supply of 522 net hectares. Next slide, please. So 522 was where we began this reporting period, and to get to the mid-2022 supply, the first thing we did was remove industrial and logistics land developed between mid-2018 and mid-22, which was 65.7 net hectares. We made adjustments based on new planning information such as zoning or amendments, which added 12.3 net hectares to arrive at a mid-2022 supply of 468.6 net hectares of industrial and logistics designated land. Next slide, please. So a similar exercise was applied to the rural industrial and logistics land supply. We began with 420 net hectares of rural industrial and logistic designated land. We removed rural industrial and logistics land developed between mid-2018 and mid-2022, which worked out to 44.5 net hectares. Adjustments were made based on new planning information, which added 17.66 net hectares to arrive at a total mid-2022 supply of 393.1 net hectares. Next slide, please. So after we arrived at our supply for urban and rural designated land, we applied a 5-year consumption rate to the urban land to arrive at a 31-year supply of vacant urban industrial logistics designated land and a 33-year supply of vacant lands designated for rural industrial logistics uses. And we found that this was sufficient land supply to satisfy the provincial policy statement requirement for employment lands to 2046 and beyond. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good presentation for sure. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate staff for undertaking this study, particularly the industrial land one. It's a very important topic in my ward with over 700 acres of light industrial zone land in the Carp Road corridor. And I think in any municipality, the vacant land and particularly shovel-ready land, great economic tool and economic development indicator. And I just want to, first of all, I received some good feedback from local business, particularly the Carp Road Corridor BIA, on the work that you did in terms of, vacant supply included in the inventory. For example, the Carp Airport lands were removed because they're intended for another specific purpose. So some compliments sent to you for asking, will this ever be developed, or are there other uses for the land? So my question in regards to total supply, so that total supply is certainly one element of ensuring economic development potential and that we're in line with provincial policy statements. But I also think it's important to understand current supply of vacant property that is actually ready to go. So I wanted to ask if there has been or will be an analysis to show our supply of, well-located, properly sized zoning and services in place. So did we differentiate between whether or not they're serviced or not, and whether it's ready to go as light industrial land? And do we have enough to meet the market demand that we see?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the full report does identify parcels of available vacant industrial land. It provides servicing information as well as zoning information, so that you can see which parcels are available and readily serviced for development.
Okay. And then just extending on that, has there been work to consider? So I know, like, I'm sure this is no surprise to the staff that are there today, that the Carp Road Corridor is looking to, get services run through there. So has there been any discussion on the marketability of the vacant land supply that we do have, that perhaps isn't ready to go for businesses who are perhaps skipping over the city of Ottawa to go to other jurisdictions where the land is serviced?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair, at this time, as far as there haven't been any discussions, that would be maybe a process that we could follow up with and expand the survey to follow up on that type of discussion in the future.
Okay. That would be great. I would be love to take part in that discussion. And lastly, so I know just in terms of industrial land and the competitiveness of the region, has the city done, or does it plan to do, any competitive analysis of the land nearby but outside of Ottawa? I know there's industrial parks in Arnprior, Carleton Place, the Russell 417 Industrial Park, for instance. So has there been any analysis of the amount of land that's available, ready to go in surrounding municipalities, and the issues that might cause for competitiveness for the city of Ottawa?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair, that analysis was not done as a part of this study. That once again would probably require further examination to provide that type of information on lands outside of the city of Ottawa. This was specifically a city of Ottawa study at this time.
Just want to make sure we're not missing out on opportunities because the land isn't ready to go. So I'm happy to continue those conversations, and thank you for answering my questions today.
Mr. Chair, we will add to the councillor's comment there that the city does work with Invest Ottawa to look at competitiveness beyond the municipal boundary, including Gatineau on the other side, just to look at that more of a regional outlook. And it's not just on land supply, but it's also on the type of the markets for the different jurisdictions and how ready the region is for the different users that are out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So the provincial policy statement requires us to have 15 years of land supply for residential development, and we have 25 years. Is that bad? Is there any downside to having 10 years more than what we're required?
So, Mr. Chair, we technically have 15.9 years. Once we begin the secondary planning process, the 640 can be considered as part of that supply. I guess if we look at the land supply, it's sort of an assembly line. We have 15.9 years that are getting closer to, let's say, registration and construction. But to get to that up up to speed, we also have to have designated land sort of ready to go as well as the next tranche. So it could be 25 years in total, but we want to look at it in terms of how the planning process proceeds to get a building permit. I think we're in good shape in terms of as that 15.9 year supply diminishes, we then have the 9.4 years to come in and replace it and add on. And as we go through successive official plans, it would be a similar cycle.
Okay, and all that additional land that the province put in and then took out again, so the extra expansion land, do you know how many extra years that could have added to our supply? Have you done that math?
So in terms of the expansion portion, it probably would have added another close to 8 years, I believe, just done a rough calculation. We haven't done the math on that, but looking at the province added close to 600 net hectares, and our 640 is about 9.4. It could be about 8 to 9 years of the additional that the province did add and then subsequently removed.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to shift to the industrial and logistics report. Just to clarify, so the provincial policy statement requires us to have a certain amount of land for employment growth. Is that is it specific to industrial and logistics, or is it more broad than that when the province is looking for employment?
Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. The employment areas are basically the industrial and logistics land, the rural industrial and logistics land are lands that are more in need of preserved protection for specifically industrial land uses. So that the focus of the provincial policy statement would be on those types of lands.
And so when we're looking more broadly into other types of employment growth, do we track in any way, like annual basis or otherwise, availability of lands for other industries or other economic categories?
Mr. Chair, we don't. The PPS requires a specific land supply for employment areas, but there's nothing else on the remaining other than you have sufficient designated lands to meet your planning horizon. So in our case, it would be the remainder would be the rest of the urban and the village areas to accommodate that employment growth.
Okay, and then as we just heard, there's a specific focus on industrial logistics because of the unique and intensive land requirements. So different perhaps than other categories of economic growth. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for this report and the presentation. Just a comment. I think this committee hears a lot from councillors in growth areas, especially myself, about the rapid pace of development we're seeing and the challenges that come with that. Councillor Troster, I was very pleased you called out that I always talk about the chicken and the egg situation. I feel like my message is getting through. And I think the data in this report gives some teeth to those concerns. So I do hope it provides some good context for future conversations. And although Orleans is third in total unit potential of designated greenfield supply by area, I want to point out that the breakdown by communities paints a bit of a clearer picture of what we're dealing with in Ward 19. Since you've all heard me say many times, Orleans North is not Orleans South. The ratio of net hectares per to unit potential in Mayor Blair, which is in Ward 19, has the highest development density of all the greenfield areas at 38 units per hectare. And the East Urban community comes in right behind that. So I know sometimes there's assertions that the suburbs isn't taking their share of density, but as per this report, in mid-2022, Mayor Blair, East Urban, Leitrim, Riverside South all exceeded their minimum density requirements significantly. So, you know, 16,500 new units planned in Ward 19 in the next 10 years, one urbanized east-west road to get in and out of the community. We have a stalemate with a federal agency over our transportation plan, 30-minute bus ride to the nearest LRT station. I could go on. So I hope you're all excited to help me work through that as a committee and a council, because it's certainly going to be a challenge and I can't do it alone. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious of how we compare to other cities, if we're typical or, you know, of our, roughly our size, like major city centers in terms of supply.
Councillor, to you, Mr. Chair, we didn't do a comparison in this report of other communities. I know that there is a need for industrial land in the city of Ottawa. I can't compare that to others, but that'd be something we could look into for the future.
Mr. Chair, I'll add that Ottawa is unique in Ontario in terms of the size that we have in population and in land area. Our mix of urban, suburban, and rural. If we look at other municipal jurisdictions, they would be, let's say, if we're looking at the 416 area, the 905, you know, City of Toronto would be all intensification, for example, and then a 905 would have some intensification and some greenfield. So just by the division of the municipal jurisdictions, they're not really necessarily comparable to the City of Ottawa.
I'm just asking for, you know, for competitive reasons, you know, like if we attract businesses because of that, for that reason. And I'm curious about what kind of businesses we're looking at when we talk about industrial. It's obviously changed quite a bit. Is it Amazon warehouses? Is it, you know, obviously the things of the past are going away. When we see milk factories being turned into housing, what does it look like just generally?
So, Mr. Chair, would be that latter sort of the more warehousing through the official plan review. Logistics was a big topic, and that's certainly that land supply, that type of development that we added. If we look at the overall land supply, we do have business parks that are, you know, within the inner urban transect scattered throughout the urban and suburban. So there is a variety of different business parks, but what we really focused on through that industrial logistics, that the new lands would be those that are close to highway interchanges, because that's where the majority of our goods movements come from in Ottawa, and service lands.
And also they need transit for the employees, right? So we don't want everyone, because it just feeds into people need a car to get to work because these things are not near transit, et cetera. So, or have no other way of getting to these locations. I mean, we talk about federal government having an effect on us when people work from home, like when we went through the pandemic and people aren't using our transit system, et cetera. But are people going to need as much space as they used to when employees are working from home? I mean, how is that affecting the growth?
So in terms of the industrial, the work at home is less in terms of that sector. Most of the work at home would occur within the office and public administration type of sectors. And those sectors are not as representative of the industrial sector that this report is inventorying.
Except for Amazon, because it's growing, because everyone's ordering things from home, I guess. Okay, no, I just wanted to get an idea that, you know, what the future looks like, what analysis there is of what industrial looks like. And especially with, you know, in the, from an eco perspective as well. Obviously, we have to be conscious of that when we're looking at the growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was wondering, I understand that this report is looking at a land supply lens, and, you know, when Councillor Kitts says that suburban groups are doing their share of the lifting, I know what wards aren't doing their share of the lifting, and it's College Ward and some of our other, you know, outer urban wards that have a lot of land. But when we think about some of the tensions with nearby residents and all the friction that comes through. I'm sorry, I have a small oral surgery thing, so I'm a bit draggy, but all this to say, Woodward Park business park is kind of a spot that comes up by residents as looking like an ideal place to create density. But I assume it's zoned as, mixed industrial because we do have so many industrial spots in it. But there is also a privately owned business park that extends sort of south of the Queensway. I wonder, are there opportunities as we see an evolving sort of employment landscape to incentivize, a transformation of use to more of a mixed residential development over time? Or if that's just too cost prohibitive when you've had industrial uses in the past, is it something that we can't manage? Because, that park has great transit access. It has a daycare on it. It's got quite a bit of opportunity, and I could see residents being very excited. There's one Morning Owl coffee house that, serves all of those businesses around the area, but they'd love to have, greater walkability and some other small business neighbors. So I wonder, is there an imagining of land use supply in our zoning bylaw in this respect?
So, Mr. Chair, in terms of the evolution of the existing business parks, like Woodworks is a good example. So through the official plan review, we did look at business parks that are at strategic locations for a different use. And a good example would be actually the Morrison Queensview Business Park, just north of the IKEA at Pinecrest and 417. That was actually industrial, had industrial designation and zoning. And we're going through a secondary plan now to turn that into a mixed use environment for residential. So there are opportunities for that from the official plan review. The next sort of step would be to look at those existing areas that do provide good locations for surrounding neighborhoods. And the official plan looks at those areas as mixed industrial. So it would still be a non-residential use, but instead of focusing on traditional industrial and warehousing, there is provisions there where locations are close to neighboring residential neighborhoods to allow for other service and residential oriented uses. And that is a move away from our previous official plan. So there's almost like this spectrum where the official plan looks at industrial areas, reviews them for a change and for additional permissions where it makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I'm encouraged to hear that direction. We're going to have some great new cycling facilities at Clyde and La Perriere as well. That's going to attach River Ward better to Carling as well with Councillor Kavanaugh's ward. But I'll continue the conversation offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Leeper. This is great that we're moving forward, and like my good partner here, Lane, we suffer a lot of the same challenges, especially with, finally when we get this done and essentially R1's gone forever, and we're going to see a lot of big change. And I think we're good to support a lot of it. I do have a weird one where I have Canatech Business Park, where there's actually a street with some houses on it, but it's in the business park. Do they make accommodations for those kind of cutouts? Because it's right next to Montreal Road Station. And of course, they get scooped into different zones all the time. I just want to, do we see a lot of that, or is that pretty much an anomaly?
We do see that certain things. Okay. Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. It's not an anomaly. It is does occur, and I'm trying to think of other business parks where they do have housing. I think it's Newmarket. It's certain other business parks that do have residential uses. It's generally from the past that are still accommodated within the industrial development. So Canatech is not unique in that situation.
Okay, good to hear. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of new tenants too, like really kitschy, cool, like shout out to Dominion City Brew Company and the Authentic Bakery, and it's a real good spot, and they're very excited for that Montreal Road Station to open. Connectivity to that, I know that's a separate department. Wait, that's in my department. But on that front, I just want to make sure that we're making accommodations where, people are treated like residents, because they've dealt with this with even the school boards where they get scooped up in Orleans, but they're in Beacon Hill. So I just want to make sure we're aware of these different situations. We could talk offline about that for sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. I don't see any other questions. I want to thank you very much for the presentation today. I hope that there are members of the public who are still tuned into that last item, because this is the fundamental math that determines what the city is going to look like down the road. The province has a policy statement that describes how our city is going to accommodate growth, a requirement that we have an official plan that describes how that growth is going to occur. And the math that we've heard today is what describes what that official plan is going to say. And then that official plan turns into master plans to determine how we're going to build the infrastructure that we need in order to be able to accommodate that growth. That turns into development charges that describe how we're going to pay for that growth. And then that comes into a long-range financial plan, which ultimately winds up becoming kind of a budget discussion year after year. I think to the public eye, it looks like city council is often dealing with a bunch of one-off decisions. And what do we want to deal with today, this month, this year? And the math that these folks have described is what drives that decision at a very fundamental level. And it's important to pay attention to. So I do hope there are some members of the public who tuned into that part. Thank you very much for the presentation this afternoon. That was very useful. Okay, let's take us on out of here. Okay, what was the technical? There was a technical amendment on that. Is that accepted? Is that carried? Thank you. And what was the other one? Are the reports received as amended? Are the reports received as amended? Carried, received. Is there anything else I need to do? That's it on that one. Okay. There are no in-camera items today. The headlines about Ontario I'll be good. Yeah. There are no in-camera items this afternoon. Information previously distributed, you've all received the updated cash in lieu of parkland numbers, motions which notice has previously been given. We've dealt with that. We've dealt with it. The waiver of demolition control is dealt with. Leaving Councillor Brockington on behalf of Councillor Hill to bring forward an inquiry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on behalf of Councillor Hill, regarding the National and Provincial Building Code harmonization. In May of 2023, Council chose to defer high performance development standards until more information had been obtained from the provincial government on their plans to update the building code with new green standards. Since that motion, Ontario has been working with the federal government to harmonize the national and Ontario building codes to create consistent construction standard across the country. As the federal government is advocating higher green standards and construction regulations, this merger of the two codes could have a positive impact on Ottawa's climate goals. Understanding the nature of this merger of the Ontario National Building Codes will help guide Council's decision-making as we consider our own jurisdictional oversight of energy efficiency standards and other regulatory green initiatives. Here are the questions. To staff, to the best of staff's knowledge, what is the status of the harmonization of the national and provincial building codes? And when can we expect the first changes to the Ontario Building Code as a result of this harmonization effort? And second, does Building Code Services expect that this merger will increase or decrease the standards for energy efficiency and other green building practices here in Ottawa? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. I have some questions, but I would like to preface it with some comments, if I may. That's it for inquiries. There we have no other business. I know. I am fired. Adjournment. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks.